You're sitting in a dark room, wrapped in a blanket you've probably had too long, blinking sleepily at a screen you meant to turn off 20 minutes ago. Outside, the world is loud and unreasonably bright, but in here, it's quiet. And we're going back, way back to a time when everything felt ancient because it actually was. History isn't always marble statues and epic battles. Sometimes it's a clay tablet that says 1 jar of beer for the guy with the ox. Sometimes it's a wooden toe worn down from use, or a vending machine in an Egyptian temple that spits out holy water when you drop in a coin. Yeah, that's a thing. Ancient history isn't always grand. Most of the time, it's kind of weird, kind of practical, and weirdly human. And you probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous unless you're lying under a particularly fragile stack of books, but because tonight's stories are soft, slow, and strangely hypnotic. They're designed to lull you out of your day and into the distant hum of forgotten lives. These aren't the facts you memorized for a test. These are the ones that slip in quietly and stay with you. The first customer complaint, the goddess of beer, the man who refused to run through a field of beans, the first city to install indoor plumbing and did a better job than most of us manage today. This isn't about memorizing timelines. If anything, it's about letting them blur. So don't worry about catching every name or detail. Let your mind wander. Let the facts drift in and out like smoke signals across a mountaintop. That's the point. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And if you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to comment with your location and local time. That way, we'll know who's listening, from the future, the past, or most likely somewhere near a laundry pile at 2 a.m. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started on tonight's journey together. We'll begin in the cradle of civilization, not with a king or a conquest, but with beer. Because of course we will. The first writing wasn't a poem or a prayer, it was a receipt. A Sumerian scribe leaned over a slab of wet clay, carved in a few wedge-shaped signs, and made sure someone got exactly 2 jars of barley brew and not a drop more. And just like that, history had a paper trail, so tuck yourself in and let's follow it, one strange, delightful, dusty little fragment at a time. You open your eyes, and the world smells like yeast. Not the kind from a fresh loaf of bread, but something heavier, warmer and bubbling. You're in Sumer about 5,000 years ago. The sun is already high over the reed-roofed buildings, and the streets are busy in a calm, dust-blown kind of way. Temple workers move in slow lines, hauling baskets of barley and jugs of thick brown liquid. No one's in a rush. Everyone knows what time it is, beer o'clock, and this isn't some festival or end-of-harvest celebration. This is payday. You make your way to the temple storehouse, the place where barley is tracked. Beer is brewed, and most importantly, where your daily ration is documented. Not by memory, not with pebbles or chance, but with something new. Something revolutionary. A little chunk of clay and a stick with a squared-off tip. That's right. Writing. The first writing in human history, and it's being used to record who got how much beer. No Homeric epics, no philosophical dialogues. The earliest surviving written documents are inventory lists, beer ledgers scratched into wet clay with what looks like a fat toothpick. The script is called cuneiform, and it starts off as pictographs, a jar, here, a barley grain, There, a few wedge-shaped numbers. And just like that, we're in business. The scribes aren't poets. They're accountants, government payroll officers, data entry clerks in sandals. And they're kind of amazing. Because beer isn't just a drink consumer, it's infrastructure. It's calorie-dense, safer than water, mildly alcoholic, and widely beloved. Everyone drinks it. Kids, elders, priests, merchants. Even the gods get some in ceremonial bowls laid out during temple rituals. The Sumerians didn't invent beer, but they turned it into an economy. Picture this. You're a laborer helping build a temple or dig a canal. Every day, instead of coins or goods, you're handed beer, an amount carefully portioned based on your job. 1 jar for hauling bricks, 2 for hauling bricks and not complaining. Maybe 3 if it's festival season and the scribe is in a generous mood. Those little tokens of gratitude recorded in clay, filed away, left to dry in the sun and become somehow history. Modern archaeologists crack these tablets open like stale cookies and discover that you, anonymous temple worker number 32, once received 2 jars and a handful of onions on a particularly hot day in 2900 BCE. We don't know your name, but we know what you drank. And somewhere in the blur of barley and bureaucracy, something magical happens. Those pictographs get faster to write. Less about drawing jars and more about symbols. A wedge here, a line there. And soon, cuneiform is born, real formalized writing. It spreads fast. First for rations, then taxes, laws, poems, and gods. Within a few centuries, people are using it to tell stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh, a tale so human and weird and beautiful that it still kind of hurts to read. A story about grief and mortality and friendship inscribed in the same script used to calculate barley. It's like discovering that the same guy who wrote your paycheck also penned Shakespeare. But even before Gilgamesh, there's another literary treasure, a hymn. One of the oldest surviving songs in the world. Not about war, not about kings, but about Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. Imagine that. The first known song is basically a recipe. It's an ode to fermentation praising Ninkasi as she brews in a great vessel of sweet aromatics. The lyrics walk you through the steps, baking barley bread, soaking it in water, fermenting the mash, filtering the brew. Every line is equal parts praise and instruction. A spiritual tutorial in beer making. Historians call it poetic. Brewers call it surprisingly accurate. And you might be thinking, this all feels weirdly modern, because it is. You've seen spreadsheets. You've tracked expenses. You've waited for someone to Venmo you back after splitting dinner. This is the same thing, just with clay and barley instead of apps and receipts. It's kind of comforting, isn't it? To know that the world's first scribes weren't aloof philosophers with feathered pens, but practical people trying to keep a society from spilling over into chaos. They weren't writing for glory. They were writing so that someone didn't get shorted half a jar of beer. And here's the twist. That's how all the big things start. Not with lofty goals, but with small, stubborn needs. Writing wasn't born from inspiration. It was born from logistics. From someone saying, hey, we need to keep track of who gets what. That practical mindset doesn't take away from the magic. If anything, it makes it more relatable. Civilization didn't begin with prophecy or art. It began with counting. And counting, as it turns out, is kind of poetic too. So next time, you scribble out a grocery list or jot down a reminder you're participating in a 5,000-year-old tradition. One that started not with alphabets or quills, but with a wedge pressed into soft clay and a promise that yes, you'll get your pint today. And if you don't, well, don't worry. There's a guy named Nanny a few centuries later who's about to write the first customer complaint in history. But that's another story. For now, just drift. Let the barley settle. Let the ink dry. And sleep soundly, knowing that writing the thing that built history began with beer. Your eyes are still adjusting to the warm glow of ancient torchlight when someone quietly lifts their sandal and limps across the temple courtyard. You glance down and stop, because there beneath the frayed hem of a linen robe is not a foot. It's a wooden toe. A prosthetic dark and worn smooth, attached with little strips of leather. This isn't some novelty or ceremonial trinket. You can tell, even in this flickering light, that it's been walked on, used daily maybe for years. That toe has done more living than most people's whole sandals. You're in ancient Egypt now, somewhere near Luxor, over 3,000 years ago. The woman who wore this toe likely hobbled her way through crowded marketplaces and stone courtyards, her prosthetic bumping gently against the dust. She didn't have titanium, no surgical implants, no physical therapy. Just a craftsman, a couple pieces of wood, and a need to walk, to live more normally, to wear sandals like everyone else. And that's the part that sticks with you. This wasn't a funeral accessory or a token for the afterlife. The toe shows signs of wear, real wear. The kind you only get from walking day after day, maybe favoring one side, maybe adjusting your gait to make it work. Someone even repaired it at some point. It squeaked and they fixed it, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. We remember the Egyptians for their pyramids, their gold masks, their sacred cats, and sprawling tombs. But here's this tiny, quiet object saying, actually, we were practical too. Surgery wasn't just for pharaohs. Mobility mattered even to a woman who history didn't bother to name. And what's even more striking, this is the oldest known prosthetic in the world. Older than the Capua leg from Rome. Older than the crude iron arms forged for medieval knights. This toe, the simplest little piece of carved wood, is where we begin. But of course, the Egyptians weren't new to medical innovation. They had surgical tools, dental instruments, prescriptions for everything from headaches to burns. They treated abscesses, reset broken bones, and even dabbled in early antibiotics using moldy bread on wounds. It wasn't magic. It was observation, practice, ingenuity. Some of it was spiritual sure incantations, offerings, prayers, but much of it was straight up clinical. You cut here, you stitch. There you hope the gods are watching, but also you sterilize your blade in a flame. Just in case. They even had textbooks. The Edwin Smith Papyrus is basically an ancient medical school workbook. It breaks down injuries by symptom diagnosis and treatment: head trauma, spinal damage, jaw dislocation. Some conditions were marked an ailment I will treat. Others, more grimly, were labeled an ailment I will not treat, honest if nothing else. And now, you're wondering how many people back then were walking around with missing toes, bad knees, crooked spines. We tend to think of the past as broken and helpless. But here's a woman 3,000 years ago solving a problem. She needed a toe. Someone made her one. She probably wasn't royalty. She didn't leave behind a statue or an inscription. Just this quiet piece of engineering stitched onto her foot like a secret. And it tells us something remarkable, that comfort mattered. That dignity mattered. That function and form weren't always reserved for the wealthy. We talk about big monuments, grand gestures. But sometimes it's a toe that changes how you see a civilization. Fast forward a bit to ancient Rome, and we start seeing more examples. Bronze legs, articulated arms, iron hooks worn by veterans of battle. The capua leg, a bronze and wood prosthesis found near Naples, was likely crafted for a soldier sometime around 300 BCE. It was sturdy, heavy, functional, the kind of thing you'd strap on and limp into town with proud just to be walking. And yet, none of it came before the wooden toe from Egypt. That toe is kind of perfect in its smallness. It doesn't shout. It doesn't sparkle. It just worked. And sometimes that's the most revolutionary thing an invention can do. So you close your eyes for a moment and picture it. Dusty sandals shuffling through the heat. The soft creak of leather straps the tick of wood against stone. A woman steps forward slowly, carefully, leaving no name, but a perfect imprint in time. And maybe that's enough. You're in a temple, but not the kind you're imagining. This isn't silent and incense-filled, and it definitely doesn't smell holy. It smells metallic, humid, maybe a little musty, like old brass left out in the rain. You glance around. The stone walls are worn smooth by generations of feet and prayers. An attendant leans casually by a pedestal with a basket of coins. And on that pedestal, there's a boxy contraption, bronze slightly corroded with an opening at the top and a spout below. You step forward uncertain, drop a coin into the slot, and then clink. A ball rolls inside the mechanism. Somewhere behind the curtain of metal weights, shift a lever tilts, and with a quiet click, a measured trickle of water flows from the spout. You just used an ancient vending machine. No buttons, no buzz, just gravity balance and a remarkably clever Greek engineer named Hero of Alexandria, 2,000 years ago. Let's be clear, this wasn't dispensing grape soda or cheese puffs. It was dispensing holy water. Sacred, ritual-purified, temple-sanctioned water. The kind you'd use to anoint yourself before an offering, or to wash your hands before entering a sacred space. You weren't buying convenience. You were buying purity with exact change, please. And while the machine itself seems simple to us, coin and water out, it was a feat of engineering brilliance. Hero of Alexandria didn't just invent this. He invented a lot. Water pumps, steam-powered toys, mechanical birds, even a rotating device powered by fire and air pressure, basically a primitive steam engine nearly 1/800 years before industrial Britain even thought of it. But this vending machine, it's what sticks with people. Maybe because it's so weirdly relatable. We still have the same expectation today, insert coin, get thing. The function hasn't changed, just the packaging. Picture this. You're standing in line at a vending machine, hoping the spiraled plastic arm doesn't leave your snack dangling. And 2,000 years ago, someone was standing in line, hoping the water wouldn't spill or overpour. Same anxiety, different stakes. What's wild is that this device wasn't a novelty. It was practical. It solved a real problem. People in temples needed a fair, predictable way to dispense holy water. And humans being humans, they occasionally took more than they should. So Hero devised a system that worked every time. A coin's weight triggered the flow. When the coin tipped the balance past a certain point, it released a small stream. When the coin fell away, the valve closed. No priest supervision needed. It's automation, but sacred, and it's not just a one-off. Records suggest similar devices were used in Egyptian temples, which raises the question, how many visitors thought it was divine intervention? How many people dropped in a coin, saw water flow, and whispered, "It's a miracle," when really it was physics? Hero didn't invent magic. He invented the illusion of it, and he did it over and over again. One of his showpieces was a temple door that opened automatically when a fire was lit on an altar. As the heat rose, it pressurized air in a hidden chamber, which pushed water into a container, which then pulled a rope, which dramatically reverently swung the doors open. Q gasps from the congregation. Q, one very smug Greek engineer watching from behind a curtain. Even his fountains weren't just pretty. They used air pressure and siphoning to circulate water endlessly long before electricity existed. He understood how to turn invisible forces' air-weight motion into carefully choreographed experiences. The original stage tech, and here's the part that makes modern engineers weep. Almost all of Hero's devices were lost or ignored for centuries, not because they didn't work, but because no one else knew what to do with them. They were too early, too clever, too quietly revolutionary. You get the feeling Hero would have had a blast with modern vending machines. He'd probably find them a bit gaudy, but he'd appreciate the principle. Coin in, water or Snickers, bar out. So let's circle back to that temple for a moment. Imagine standing there, the cool trickle of sacred water splashing into your palm. It feels clean, refreshing, sacred. You know it came from a bronze box, but you still kind of want to whisper, "Thank you," just in case. Because even when we know the science, a well-executed illusion still feels like magic. And that's what this section is really about. Not vending machines, not just Hero of Alexandria, but that very human mix of practicality and wonder. That impulse to build things that solve problems and dazzle us at the same time. Somewhere in a dusty workshop overlooking the harbor, Hero is still smiling. Not because his inventions were worshipped, but because 2,000 years later, they still work. And that's more than most vending machines can say. You've barely stepped off the temple floor when your surroundings shift again. Drier, dustier, a little more serious. You're standing in the shadow of a ruined city, its walls long since tumbled down. The sun hangs low over the plains of northern Mesopotamia, and at your feet are thousands of small square tablets, baked clay, etched with tiny wedge-shaped marks. They're not random. They're organized, filed, cataloged. This isn't a ruin. This is a library. You're in Nineveh around the 7th century BCE. And the man who built this place, King Ashurbanipal, wasn't content with just ruling an empire. He wanted to remember things, everything. He ordered scribes to travel across the known world, copying texts, hauling tablets, collecting knowledge, like it was treasure. And in many ways, it was. Over 30,000 tablets once lined the shelves here. Think about that for a moment. 30,000 pieces of information, epic poems, legal records, medical recipes, astronomical observations, omens, letters, dictionaries, even notes on how to treat dog bites. Yes, really, it comes up more than once. If you've ever worried about forgetting to back up your hard drive, imagine trying to preserve your entire civilization's brain in chunks of sun-dried mud. And yet Ashurbanipal tried. He wasn't just some bored monarch showing off. He was educated deeply, maybe even obsessively. He could read Sumerian and Akkadian. He personally reviewed new additions to the archive. His library wasn't a side project, it was a strategy. a memory vault for an empire constantly on the edge of war, drought, rebellion. If the palace burned, at least the past might survive. And funny enough, it did. When Nineveh finally fell in 612 BCE, the enemy armies didn't just sack the city, they set it on fire. But in a weird historical twist, the fire didn't destroy the tablets. It preserved them. The intense heat baked the clay even harder, turning those once fragile records into nearly indestructible artifacts. It's like someone dropped your laptop into a volcano, and somehow the files became permanent. Thanks, Arson. That's how we got the Epic of Gilgamesh. One copy of that ancient story, the oldest surviving narrative in human history, was among the tablets found in Ashurbanipal's library. Without this accidental baking, Gilgamesh might have vanished. No floods, no immortality quests, no tragic friend with an ominously foreshadowed cough. And it wasn't just literature. The library held texts on divination, astronomy, geography, botany. Some tablets contained warnings not to remove them. Some were organized with a rudimentary system marks to help locate similar works. A kind of proto-Dewey Decimal in cuneiform. Ashurbanipal knew what he was doing. His library wasn't just about gathering facts, it was about control. The ability to read omens, predict eclipses, record treaties. Knowledge was power, and this king wasn't about to lose his grip. What's even more striking is that most of the tablets weren't originals. They were copies. His scribes traveled far, transcribing older texts from Babylon, and beyond. In some cases, the tablets they copied are the only reason we know those older texts ever existed. That's historical insurance, double-checking the past by duplicating it. And now, centuries later, they're still being read. Deciphered slowly, lovingly, by people who dedicate their lives to squinting at tiny wedges and trying to figure out whether a symbol means cattle debt or don't touch this, or you'll anger the gods. You wouldn't think clay tablets would last longer than scrolls or books, but here they are, holding secrets in neat, durable lines. So what does all this tell us? First, that ancient people weren't living in fog and superstition. They were writing things down, categorizing, preserving. They were building something bigger than themselves, something meant to outlive war and wind and time. Second, it shows that fire doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it's transformation. A city burns and a story survives. And finally, it reminds us that the past isn't just kings and monuments. It's data, lists, scribbles on clay from someone who thought, maybe this will matter someday. Spoiler, it did. So tonight, while you drift somewhere between ancient cities and the hum of your own breath, think about the shelves of that dusty library. Think about a scribe dipping a stylus into clay, careful with every stroke. Think about Gilgamesh, carved onto baked stone, his grief, his pride, his longing for something that might never come back. And think about Ashurbanipal, that strangely bookish king who dared to believe that memory could be molded, fired, and kept. In the end, he was right. The sun's rising again, but this time over a very different landscape. You're no longer in the Middle East. You're standing in Japan, looking down from a bird's eye view, and the ground beneath you is peculiar. It's shaped like a giant keyhole, a circular mound at one end, tapering into a long rectangle. From above, it's unmistakable, a perfect old-fashioned keyhole carved directly into the earth. This is a kofun, a royal tomb from ancient Japan, dating back to the 3rd to 7th centuries CE. You're hovering over a monument of quiet grandeur, an entire hill sculpted by human hands, built not for the living, but to honor the dead. And these tombs, they're massive. The largest, the Daisen Kofun in Osaka, is over 400 meters long. That's longer than the Empire State Building laid on its side. You could drive around it and still not see the whole thing. But unlike Egypt's pyramids or Mesopotamian ziggurats, you won't find tourists crawling all over it. In fact, you're not even allowed inside. Why? Because it's sacred. Officially designated as an imperial tomb, the Japanese government restricts excavation, which means archaeologists can only study the fringes. The inside still a mystery, still untouched, still waiting. But what we do know, what the artifacts tell us from smaller similar tombs, is enough to make your eyelids flutter in curiosity. Inside these kofun buried deep beneath layers of stone and soil were powerful elites, emperors, clan leaders, noble warriors, and surrounding them, grave goods, bronze mirrors, swords, armor, decorative combs, ornaments shaped like birds and horses, wealth symbolism and status sealed into the earth like a whisper. And then there's the haniwa, hundreds of clay figures placed in neat lines around the tomb's edges. They come in all forms: animals, warriors, musicians, dancers, houses' shields, even farmers. Some look solemn. Some are cartoonishly charming. All of them stand like sentinels, silently guarding the mound. What were they for? That's still debated. Maybe they marked sacred boundaries. Maybe they protected the dead. Maybe they served as stand-ins for human sacrifice, offering symbolic guardians without needing actual people. Or maybe they were just the last faces the dead saw before burial: friends, family, ritual dancers frozen in mid-step. Whatever their purpose, the haniwa give the kofun period a distinctive identity. You can spot their rounded features and broad postures in museum cases, in textbooks, even in emoji. Yes, they have one. Go look. And yet, for all their visibility, the kofun era itself remains oddly quiet. We don't have epic texts from this time. No scrolls, no stone-carved propaganda. It predates Japan's written history. What we know comes from the ground, from bones, pots, weapons, and clay, from shapes in the earth. What's fascinating is how this period reflects a shift, a civilization moving from scattered clans to something bigger, more centralized, more organized. Building tombs of enormous size wasn't just about honoring someone important. It was a public display of power. A message to anyone who saw it: this person mattered, this person ruled. And it wasn't built by accident. Thousands of workers were needed. Resources had to be moved, labor coordinated, permissions granted. It's not hard to see echoes of Egypt here, of massive burial projects that doubled as infrastructure, as employment, as legacy. But the Japanese did it their way. No giant stone blocks, no intricate hieroglyphs, just earth shaped carefully, grass growing over it, trees softening the edges, the past blending back into nature. And here's the strange part: some of the largest kofun, like the Daisen tomb, are surrounded by moats. Not one, but three. Circular bands of water like ripples, holding the dead in the center. Some believe this created a literal boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead. Others think it was a defensive measure, or maybe just ceremonial flair. Whatever the case, it adds to the mystery. These aren't just graves. They're landscapes of remembrance, and unlike pyramids or temples, they're hard to see from ground level. You have to look down from the sky to appreciate the shape, which makes you wonder, were they built for the gods to view from above, or maybe for the dead themselves, rising into the afterlife, glancing back and seeing the map of their memory perfectly arranged. And still today, thousands of years later, these mounds shape the terrain of Japan. City streets curve around them. Forests grow on their slopes. Locals walk their dogs in their shadows. The past isn't gone, it's underfoot. And in that way, the kofun aren't just tombs. They're reminders of lives once lived, of power once held, of stories still buried. So tonight, as your breathing slows and your thoughts drift to quieter places, imagine standing in a field just after dawn. Mist clings to the grass, and beneath your feet is a keyhole, not to a house, not to a vault, but to a memory so large it had to be buried in the shape of a secret, not to keep it hidden, but to keep it whole. You squint into the sunlight, and the sea is crashing against stone. Salt water sprays into the air as the waves batter an old jagged wall jutting into the Mediterranean. You expect the structure to crumble. It should, really. It's taken over 2,000 years of punishment, but it doesn't budge. The stone is weathered, sure-pocked and bleached, but still standing strong, still holding. You're looking at Roman concrete, and it is, without exaggeration, better than the stuff holding up half your local shopping mall. It's one of history's strangest truths. The Romans, those bath-loving, sandal-clad, overly dramatic conquerors, figured out how to make concrete that gets stronger over time, not weaker, not cracked by moisture or salt or time, stronger. And the wild part, we're still not completely sure how they pulled it off. Let's start with the basics. Roman engineers didn't use modern cement. Instead, they used a mix of volcanic ash lime and seawater. That alone makes modern contractors twitch. Seawater. Are you kidding? Salt water is the enemy of modern concrete. It corrodes steel reinforcements and speeds up decay. But the Romans leaned into it, because in their version, seawater was the secret ingredient. Here's how it works. When their special blend of volcanic ash and lime met seawater, a chemical reaction kicked in. It formed new minerals inside the concrete, specifically one called aluminous tobermorite, which is a bit of a mouthful, but sounds like something a Pokemon would evolve into. This mineral acts like a natural glue. It fills in the cracks. It locks everything together. It heals. That's right. Roman concrete didn't crumble in salt water. It reacted to it. Slowly, silently, invisibly. It evolved. And the best part, the Romans had no idea why. They weren't testing pH levels in labs. They didn't have microscopes. They just did what the ancients often did best: they observed. They saw which mixtures held up. They noticed which harbors stayed intact. They borrowed materials from regions with active volcanoes like Mount Vesuvius and mixed them with intuition and experience. Trial, error, repeat. It wasn't luck. It was empirical wisdom passed down from mason to mason, from builder to builder. They used this concrete to build piers, aqueducts, bathhouses, and the massive dome of the Pantheon, the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome, still standing after nearly 2,000 years. Let that sink in while you look at the hairline crack forming in your new apartment ceiling. Meanwhile, a Roman engineer from 50 BCE is yelling across time, "Try volcanic ash, you cowards." It's kind of humbling. We think of modern technology as the pinnacle of progress, and yet in some ways, we're still playing catch-up with people in tunics who carved their blueprints into stone tablets and stirred their mortar by hand. Modern scientists have spent years trying to reverse engineer Roman marine concrete. Researchers have taken tiny core samples from ancient harbors, analyzed the crystals inside, and confirmed what the Romans figured out by feel their recipe worked because it changed when exposed to the sea. Now we're trying to copy it, not just out of admiration, but necessity. Our concrete modern Portland cement is incredibly strong, but incredibly flawed. It starts deteriorating almost immediately. It cracks it, rusts it, fails, especially in saltwater environments. The average bridge, it's got a lifespan of about 5,100 years. A Roman harbor wall still trucking after 2 millennia and more than a few tsunamis. Some researchers believe Roman-style concrete could help us build in space on the moon, on Mars, anywhere where resources are limited and seawater-like conditions are common. Who would have guessed that a harbor builder from ancient Ostia might be the spiritual grandfather of off-world architecture? And yet the Romans didn't stop with durability. They were obsessed with scale symmetry aesthetics. Their concrete wasn't just tough, it was elegant. They carved grand arches, engineered vast amphitheaters, poured underwater foundations with nothing more than timber forms, patience, and chemistry. Concrete was freedom. It let them break away from the limits of carved stone and create structures that bent, curved, and soared. So why did the secret get lost? Well, as empires tend to do, Rome eventually collapsed. Knowledge that was once passed on by skilled laborers faded away. No written treatises fully captured the ratios, the timing, the environmental context. The formulas became legends. The techniques became myths. And when later civilizations tried to rebuild, they reached for what was easy, what was scalable, what was cheap. We replaced volcanic ash with industrial cement, and it worked for a while. But it doesn't hold up like the old stuff. It doesn't get better with age. It just ages. So tonight, while your eyes are heavy and the world outside starts to fade, imagine standing at the edge of an old Roman harbor, waves slapping rhythmically against the stone. Somewhere deep inside that weathered wall, a slow-motion chemical miracle is unfolding. Crystals forming, strength increasing, time pressing in, and the structure quietly pushing back. It's not flashy. It doesn't glow or sing, but it's enduring. And maybe, in the long sleep of history, that's the most impressive feat of all. The stone beneath your feet is cool. That's the first thing you notice. You press your palm to the wall beside you, and it gives no hint of what lies behind it. The passage is narrow, quiet. And then someone beside you whispers, "Watch this." They push gently on the stone, and without a sound, an entire section of wall pivots inward. No hinges, no visible handle, just movement. Smooth, balanced, massive. You're staring into the darkness of a secret chamber hidden behind a 20-ton swiveling stone door inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. You take a step back, not because you're afraid, but because your brain is catching up to your eyes. How did they do that? The Great Pyramid tomb of Pharaoh Khufu. Marvel of engineering subject of countless conspiracy theories is many things. But what people rarely mention is how cleverly it was built on the inside. We're so dazzled by its size that we forget its subtleties. And this door, this nearly invisible pivoting slab of stone, might just be the best trick it has up its sleeve. The door wasn't discovered in some grand unveiling. It was only found centuries later when explorers accidentally triggered it from the inside. One small push and a slab of limestone, several tons in weight, swung open effortlessly. The fit was so precise that from the outside you couldn't tell it was there at all. It was flush with the wall, seamless, as if the pyramid was made in one single pour. But of course it wasn't. It was carved, laid, measured, and above all, engineered. Historians still debate how these pivoting doors worked so smoothly. Some suggest they used carefully shaped pivot points carved into the top and bottom of the door itself. Simple socket joints, really. Like a giant stone peg in a stone hole. With enough precision. And let's face it, the ancient Egyptians had a lot of precision. This setup would allow the door to rotate with minimal effort, almost like a revolving bookcase in a spy movie. But this was no prop. This was a security feature, a pressure valve, a hidden passage, maybe even all three. Think about it. You're burying a king whose tomb is filled with treasure-sacred texts and a body believed to be divine. You need misdirection. You need traps. You need doors that aren't doors. And the Great Pyramid delivered. Inside, the passages twist and rise with confusing geometry. The king's chamber is hidden deep within, and getting to it requires navigating shafts, low corridors, and choke points. Some of the corridors were sealed with granite blocks, slid into place after burial, rendering paths inaccessible. Others may have had features like this door meant to disappear into the architecture. The Great Pyramid wasn't just a tomb. It was a puzzle box. Even the so-called air shafts, narrow tunnels leading from the king's and queen's chambers to the outside, have sparked theories for years. Some say they were for ventilation. Others suggest symbolic passageways for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the heavens. Whatever their purpose, they were engineered with astonishing accuracy, pointing directly to certain stars and constellations like Orion's Belt and Sirius, both associated with Egyptian mythology. And then there's the stone itself. Each block of the pyramid was quarried-shaped and hauled into place with meticulous care. The outer casing stones, now mostly eroded or looted, were polished limestone so smooth they reflected the sun like a mirror. Imagine that. A gleaming white mountain rising from the desert, visible for miles, and hidden within it a perfectly balanced door. Let that sink in. In the 26th century BCE, someone, not a god, not an alien, but a person with a chisel carved a door so precise it vanished into a wall. And it worked. We forget sometimes that the ancients weren't just spiritual, they were deeply practical. They understood counterweights. They understood friction. They understood that if you chisel a pivot point with enough accuracy, you can move mountains with a finger. It wasn't magic, it was math. Which, let's be honest, feels like magic when you're working with raw stone and no margin for error. And here's a strange little twist. There may have been more than one secret door. Some scholars speculate that additional concealed passageways or compartments remain undiscovered, hidden behind slabs we haven't dared to disturb. Even today, with fiber optics, ground-penetrating radar, and robots crawling through air shafts, we're still uncovering secrets. In 2017, researchers using thermal imaging discovered a large void near the center of the pyramid, just above the Grand Gallery. No one knows what it is. A hidden chamber, a structural cavity, a trap left unopened for 4,500 years. Whatever it is, it's waiting. And it adds to the pyramid's reputation as less of a monument and more of an enigma carved in stone. So tonight, as you settle deeper into your pillow, think of that silent, pivoting door. How many footsteps passed by it never realizing it was there? How many robbers slammed their fists against blank walls while the passage lay just a gentle push away? And what secrets might still lie beyond? Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world isn't a monument that shouts. It's a door that whispers. You hear the roar before you see it. Not a battle, not the crowd. It's your stomach growling as you step into the arena. But you're not a spectator. You're the entertainment. And as you pull the heavy wooden door open and step into the blinding sunlight of a Roman amphitheater, you're not thinking about glory. You're thinking about beans. Because contrary to every epic movie you've ever seen, Roman gladiators weren't chiseled meat-devouring warriors with stakes on their spears. They were mostly vegetarians, thick-waisted, durable, and running on lentils and barley. Yeah, barley. Turns out, the so-called heroes of the arena were affectionately nicknamed Hordery the Barley Men. It doesn't sound terribly intimidating until you realize these guys could take a sword to the shoulder and still get up swinging. Their diet wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Think of it like the ancient version of bulking season, their primary fuel. A simple mash of beans, legumes, barley gruel, maybe some dried fruit if they were lucky. No red meat, no fancy wine. Just dense, starchy fuel to help them build thick layers of fat and muscle. That's right, fat. Gladiators wanted a bit of padding, not for warmth, for defense. Picture it, you're facing off against a man with a trident and a net, and the only thing between your spleen and his blade is your belly. A little extra cushion. Not a bad idea, but their diet didn't stop at bean soup and boiled grains. Archaeological digs in places like Ephesus in modern-day Turkey unearthed gladiator bones with unusual chemical markers, high in strontium, low in zinc, which told researchers two things. These guys weren't eating meat, and they were consuming massive amounts of plant ash. Wait, plant ash? Yep. After training, they drank a tonic made from charred wood, or bone ash, mixed into vinegar or water. Think of it as the ancient Gatorade. Rich in calcium and minerals, it was believed to help recovery and strengthen bones. No electrolytes, no neon colors, just soot and vinegar. Yum. Now why ash? The logic wasn't entirely wrong. Ash contains calcium carbonate and other minerals that could aid bone health. It was an early attempt at supplementation, primitive sure, but based on observation. These were men who put their bodies on the line every day. If chugging a cup of burnt tree made the bruises fade faster, they were in. And it wasn't just the diet that was surprising, it was the system behind it. Gladiators were often enslaved, but their care was strategic. A dead man can't fight, and a weak man doesn't sell tickets. Their schools, called ludi, had structured diets, training regimens, and even in-house doctors. Broken bones were set, wounds were stitched, and food was measured out with an eye for peak performance. They weren't disposable, they were investments. Some gladiators became stars, drawing massive crowds and celebrity status. Their likenesses were painted on walls, their names etched in graffiti. Fans cheered them on with chants and betting tokens. Others lived and died in relative obscurity, a few bruises short of fame. But no matter the fame level, they all shared the same unglamorous truth. Daily life was routine, repetitive, and surprisingly mundane. They trained, they ate, they slept, they drank vinegar and ash, and tried not to get disemboweled on Saturday. And not all fights ended in death. That's another Hollywood fib. Gladiators were expensive to train, feed, and house. Killing one in every bout would be like setting fire to your sports team after every game. Many matches were judged by skill, not blood. Losers could be spared if they fought well or had a good crowd reaction. It was less deathmatch, more brutal performance art, and it was highly regulated. There were different classes of fighters, Thracians, Myrmiones, Retiarii, each with their own armor styles and weapons. Matchups were choreographed for contrast and drama. A lightly armed, fast-moving net fighter against a heavily armored tank with a short sword. The Roman version of pay-per-view. What makes it all more human is the detail. You find inscriptions from gladiators leaving behind messages like Felix won his freedom after 9 fights, or Crescens' net fighter fought bravely and fell. There's even graffiti from fans praising one fighter's handsome thighs, because of course. And here's the part where we circle back to the ash smoothie. These men who risked their lives in sand-covered arenas trusted in soot to heal them. They didn't have protein powder. They didn't have pre-workout. They had burnt bark and vinegar, and they believed it helped. Maybe it did. Historians still debate how much of this bone ash tonic was nutritional science versus ritual. Was it symbolic? Was it passed down through generations of trainers? Did it matter whether it worked? If they thought it did. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But what's certain is that the lives of gladiators weren't simple. They weren't just fighters. They were testaments to an entire society's obsession with spectacle power and control. And now, 2,000 years later, you lie in bed listening to the faint hum of the world outside, and you can almost hear it, the crunch of gravel in the arena, the distant cheer of a Roman crowd, the quiet slosh of a clay cup filled with vinegar and ash. You might not envy their lives, but you can admire their grit. And maybe, just maybe, you'll never look at a can of protein powder the same way again. The ground beneath you is rooftops. Not just 1 or 2 hundreds of flat, sun-drenched roofs, stacked so close together it feels like you're walking on the world's largest Lego set. There are no streets, no alleys, no signs telling you where to go. Just a maze of low mud brick homes connected by narrow ladders and wooden walkways. You're in Çatalhöyük, one of the oldest known cities in the world, and you're walking on top of it, literally. Located in what is now southern Turkey, Çatalhöyük thrived around 7000 BCE. That's over 9,000 years ago, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older than basically everything in your history textbook. But what makes it unforgettable isn't just its age, it's how it was designed. No roads, no big public squares, no visible doors. Instead, every home in this prehistoric city was accessed by ladder through the roof. You climbed down into your house like entering a treehouse built in reverse. The ceiling doubled as the floor of your neighbor's roof. Above ground, it looked like a village built entirely of adobe shoeboxes. And that's not even the weirdest part. Inside the homes were decorated beautifully. Walls painted with murals of leopards, vultures, headless humans, geometric patterns, and even what might be the oldest known map, a depiction of the village itself, with the looming shape of a nearby volcano. Floors were layered with plaster, sometimes red-stained. There were built-in benches, storage bins, even little shrines tucked into niches. People here lived in close quarters. Families, on top of families, with no streets between them. Just rooftops, walkways, and maybe a goat or two, clambering from one home to the next. Privacy, not so much, but community, absolutely. And here's where it gets a little macabre, but also fascinating. They buried their dead under the floors, beneath the sleeping platform or hearth, wrapped in woven mats or baskets, often in a fetal position. Some homes held generations of family members layered beneath the living. Children buried with toys. Adults interred with obsidian blades, beads, or shells. Sometimes skulls were removed later, possibly for ritual use, and reburied again. Ancestors weren't distant memories. They were quite literally beneath your feet. Imagine kneeling down to grind grain while your grandmother, your cousin, and that one uncle who always snored too loud rested quietly under the floor. It wasn't creepy to them. It was normal. It was home. And yet, for all this closeness, there's very little sign of social hierarchy. The houses are nearly identical in size. Wealth isn't concentrated in a few areas. No palaces, no temples, no big centralized authority. It seems that Çatalhöyük operated on a kind of egalitarian model. People shared space, shared labor, shared the same ceiling, which again was also your sidewalk. This setup likely had practical benefits. Rooftop living meant fewer pathways at ground level for predators, pests, or enemies. It allowed for efficient use of space in a densely populated area. And with everyone's home accessible only by climbing, it was kind of self-regulating. No locks needed. Just a ladder. But there's also a spiritual side to this design. Many archaeologists believe the rooftop entry may have had symbolic importance. A descent into the home might have mirrored a descent into the earth, connecting life above with the ancestors below. Living in such close proximity to the dead may have been a reminder of the cycle of life day in, day out, right beneath your feet. And then there's the art. The people of Çatalhöyük didn't just paint walls. They embedded animal skulls into them. Bull's horns, boar jaws, leopard teeth set into plaster and painted red. Some rooms were covered in layers of ritual decoration, refreshed again and again, suggesting a spiritual function. But no centralized temples have ever been found, which means religious practice wasn't separate from daily life. It was built into the home, quite literally. Sacred and domestic weren't two different spaces. They were the same space. And here's where it starts to feel very modern. Despite its age, Çatalhöyük's layout resembles something familiar: urban density. Walkable rooftops. That's a Mediterranean village. Homes as spiritual centers. That's domestic religion. A flat city with no hierarchy. That's, well, a utopian fantasy. But still, of course, life wasn't perfect. Living so close to others probably had its downsides. Disease, noise disputes over borrowed tools, or particularly loud chickens. But they made it work for centuries. That's longer than many civilizations even survive. And then one day they moved on. There's no sign of a massive catastrophe. No invasion. No plague pit. The people of Çatalhöyük seem to have slowly abandoned the site, perhaps due to environmental changes, soil depletion, or simply a desire to try something new. They left their homes, their ancestors, and their murals behind, and they disappeared into the long hum of history. Now, archaeologists sift through their legacy layer by layer, mapping out a city where streets didn't exist and life unfolded in stacked painted boxes, where the dead and the living shared space, and every home was a little museum of memory. So tonight, as you lie under your own ceiling, probably drywall, probably not painted with leopards, imagine stepping through a hole in the roof and climbing down into a space full of firelight family and quiet echoes. Imagine living not just with your past, but on top of it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll dream in rooftops. It hits you the moment you step inside a faint echo, the way sound bounces off stone. Not the hollow kind you'd expect from an ancient ruin, but something cleaner, crisper, functional. You look down. There's a groove cut into the floor, sloping ever so slightly. You follow it, and it curves around a wall through a narrow corridor and finally opens into what looks like a bathroom, you're not in Rome. Not even in Greece. You're in Mohenjo-Daro, one of the major cities of the Indus Valley civilization, and it's the year 2500 BCE. You're looking at something that feels weirdly modern indoor plumbing, and not just a drain or a hole in the ground. No, this city was designed for water. At its peak, Mohenjo-Daro was home to maybe 40,000 people. People who lived in multi-story brick homes with private baths, covered drainage systems, and even public sanitation. Every house had access to a street-side drain. Wastewater flowed away from living areas into brick-lined channels covered with stone slabs. Some drains even had inspection points, so clogs could be removed. That's right. These ancient folks had a system for unclogging pipes. Your plumber wishes. And they weren't just managing waste, they were managing water supply. Some homes had wells right inside the house. Imagine lowering a bucket through your kitchen floor instead of walking to a communal fountain. The streets themselves were paved aligned in a grid-like pattern, suggesting forethought and city planning that would make a modern urban engineer weep with joy. It's not flashy. There are no pyramids, no ziggurats, no massive statues of gods. But Mohenjo-Daro doesn't need grandeur to impress. Its genius is quiet, logical, efficient. And then you find the Great Bath. In the middle of the city lies a rectangular pool made of baked bricks, sealed with bitumen, and surrounded by a colonnade. Stairs descend gently into the water from both ends. It looks like something from a luxury spa. This was likely a ritual bath, used for purification ceremony, maybe even community meetings. And here's the best part. It had its own drainage system. A plug at the bottom allowed the water to be drained, and channels carried it away. The floor was watertight. The engineering meticulous. Nothing was built by accident. The level of urban planning is staggering. Streets were laid out on a precise grid, with intersections forming right angles. Houses were uniform in size, and materials suggesting a society more egalitarian than hierarchical. No massive palaces, no kingly tombs, just thousands of people living with dignity in relative harmony with clean water and functioning toilets. Meanwhile, in other parts of the ancient world, folks were still squatting over open ditches and tossing waste into the street. Don't even get started on Europe, which wouldn't see plumbing this sophisticated for another 2,000 years. So how did they pull it off? Well, that's still part of the mystery. The Indus Valley civilization left behind almost no deciphered writing. Their script, found on seals and pottery, remains unreadable. We don't know what they called their cities, their leaders, their gods. We don't know what they believed, what stories they told, or even why they eventually disappeared. But we do know they valued cleanliness. Archaeological digs reveal repeated rebuilding of streets and drains. Maintenance was routine. Things were kept in order, and the baths always central. Always carefully designed. It makes you wonder, did they have public health policies? Did someone walk around reminding people to wash up? Was there a guy whose job was just drain inspector? We'll probably never know. But the layout speaks volumes. This was a civilization that believed in structure, in balance, in not living knee-deep in your own sewage. And maybe that's more telling than any monument. You can measure a society not just by what it builds, but by what it refuses to tolerate. Mohenjo-Daro didn't leave behind a pantheon of dramatic deities or long-winded epic poems. It left behind bathrooms, sewers, quiet streets paved with good intentions and baked bricks. There's something comforting about that. And yes, historians still debate how centralized the Indus civilization was. Was there a king somewhere? A ruling council? A priesthood? The archaeological record is murky, but what's clear is that someone, or maybe everyone, cared enough to maintain a system that worked for thousands of people. So what happened to them? That's the haunting part. Around 1900 BCE, the cities began to decline. Some suggest climate change, rivers dried up, monsoons shifted. Others point to trade routes collapsing or earthquakes disrupting infrastructure. There's no evidence of invasion, no great battle, just a slow fading. People moved on. The drains fell silent, the baths cracked, and history, as it often does, moved forward without explanation. But even in ruins, the bones of Mohenjo-Daro speak. A civilization that understood hygiene before most others understood conquest. A people who saw water not as a luxury, but as a shared necessity, and who built their homes around the idea that life runs smoother when the drains do too. So tonight, while you rest under the quiet hum of modern plumbing, think of that ancient engineer laying bricks in a narrow channel, smoothing plaster, checking for leaks. Not for glory, not for gold, but because people needed clean water. And because that in the end is what civilization really is. It's dark in here, not because you're in a cave or a tomb, but because the walls are thick, the ceiling low, and the only light filters through a tiny window high above. You're inside a stone room in the highlands of ancient Peru, somewhere near the Andes, maybe in the shadow of a snow-capped peak. The air smells faintly of obsidian and dried blood. You're standing in what might be the closest thing the ancient world had to an operating room. And what they're about to do, surgery on a human skull. Welcome to the world of trepanation, a medical procedure practiced for thousands of years, where a portion of the skull is carefully removed using basic tools. And by basic, we mean sharp stones, obsidian blades, and maybe a little patience. No anesthesia, no steel scalpels, just hands' intuition and an unsettling amount of confidence. The Andean people weren't the only ones who practiced trepanation, but they might have been the best at it. Between 2000 Host and 3000 years ago, cultures like the Paracas and the Inca performed these procedures regularly, and shockingly, many of their patients survived. Let that sink in. They drilled holes in living skulls with stone tools, and people lived to tell the tale. Well, probably not right away. They probably lay in bed, groaning for a few weeks first. But the point is, they recovered. Archaeologists have found skulls with trepanation holes, fully healed with the bone regrown and smoothed at the edges. In some cemeteries, over half the adult male skeletons show signs of at least one trepanation. Some show signs of 2 or 3. This wasn't an emergency-only procedure. This was routine, common, almost expected. And now you're wondering, why would anyone do this? Great question. Historians still debate the purpose of trepanation. Some believe it was done to treat head injuries like skull fractures or pressure from swelling. Others think it may have been used to relieve neurological conditions, seizures, chronic migraines, mental illness. Still others suggest it had a ritual or spiritual purpose, letting evil spirits escape, opening the head to divine insight, or preparing the body for the afterlife. It could have been all of the above. Medicine and magic weren't separate categories back then. Healing the body often meant healing the soul, or vice versa. And then there's the tool of choice, obsidian. Volcanic glass. It's sharper than surgical steel, capable of slicing at the cellular level. Some modern surgeons have even experimented with obsidian scalpels for ultra-precise incisions, but the ancients figured that out without labs, without microscopes. They just noticed how smooth the cuts were, how quickly the wounds healed when obsidian was used. So they kept using it. There's a kind of quiet brilliance to that. No fanfare, no scientific method, just results. And the technique, delicate, patient. They didn't hammer or smash. They scraped gently, methodically, layer by layer, until the bone gave way. You can see it in the skulls today. Smooth-edged holes, no signs of splintering, no panic in the incision. These weren't acts of desperation. They were skilled procedures. And here's the part that really gets under your skin, figuratively. Some of these trepanned skulls belong to soldiers. You can imagine the scene. A warrior returns from battle, head bloodied, eyes unfocused. Maybe a club struck his temple. Maybe he's been vomiting, confused, shaking. His family takes him to the local healer, a man or woman trained not by formal schooling, but by generations of passed down knowledge. They assess the wound, clean the area, sharpen their obsidian, and begin. No monitors, no gloves, just hands and experience. The man survives, the bone heals, and the next season, he fights again. Compare that to Europe in the Middle Ages, where trepanation was still practiced, but with significantly lower survival rates. Blunt tools, unclean conditions, no understanding of infection. Meanwhile, 2,000 years earlier, Andean surgeons were working in open-air huts, probably using alcohol-rich chicha to clean wounds and mild coca leaf sedation to keep patients from screaming. Not exactly sterile, but effective. And it wasn't just about the surgery. It was about recovery. Patients were cared for, bandaged, monitored, maybe fed special diets or treated with herbal poultices. Someone sat by their side, changed their dressing, watched for fever, and hoped. That kind of aftercare leaves a footprint. In the archaeological record, healed trepanation sites outnumber unhealed ones by a large margin. That tells us these weren't flukes. These were functioning medical systems. And it makes you ask, how much do we underestimate ancient people? Because when we picture early civilizations, we often imagine superstition, fumbling failure. But the Andean cultures were precise, focused, practiced. They knew the body not through textbooks, but through touch. And you can't help but feel respect, even awe. Tonight, as your mind drifts and the world softens around the edges, imagine lying under a thatched roof, staring up at a flickering oil lamp as someone leans over your head with a razor-sharp sliver of glass. They are calm, measured, intent. And maybe, just maybe, they're about to save your life. And in 2,000 years, someone will hold your skull gently in their gloved hands, run a fingertip over the healed hole, and whisper, they knew what they were doing. You're standing on a dusty plateau staring out at a sea of mud, brick, and stone. But it's not a ruin, not yet. It's alive, humming with voices, shuffling feet, the clatter of carts over packed earth. You're in Uruk, the world's first true city, and everything around you feels brand new. It's the 4th millennium BCE, and what you're seeing is history in the making. Not the flashy kind with kings and conquests, but something deeper, the slow, deliberate invention of civilization. Uruk began as a simple settlement, just a gathering of homes near the Euphrates River. But by 300 BCE, it had become a metropolis home to over 50,000 people, a number that wouldn't be matched by many places. until the rise of Rome thousands of years later. This isn't just the first big city. It's the place where the very idea of urban life took root. Picture it. Streets, neighborhoods, marketplaces, buzzing with traders, selling barley wool fish and date syrup. People hauling jars of oil. Donkeys, braying as they carry bundles of reeds or sacks of grain. The air smells like baking bread and wet clay. And in the distance, towering over everything, rises a ziggurat, the city's sacred mountain stacked in levels climbing toward the heavens. This is the home of Gilgamesh, the legendary king, whose name echoes through time in one of the oldest epic stories ever written. Whether or not he was real, Uruk certainly was, and it left behind a legacy carved in clay and cuneiform, and the city's crown jewel, the temple complex of Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and fertility. Her temple wasn't just a place of worship. It was a center of government economy and social life. Temples like these were where people brought goods, paid taxes, borrowed grain, received rations, and recorded their lives on tablets. That's right, writing, the very act of turning thoughts into symbols, was refined and expanded here. Those scribes with their styluses sitting in shaded courtyards weren't just poets or scholars. They were administrators, accountants, and warehouse keepers, and they were busy. You glance down at a drying tablet on the floor. It says something like 5 goats, 2 jars of oil, delivered to the temple of Inanna. Not exactly poetry, but incredibly important. This was the pulse of the city, keeping track of what moved, where, and when. And that's how Uruk functioned. Not through brute force, but through bureaucracy, through record keeping, through the subtle, persistent rhythm of transactions. But don't let that make it sound dull. Uruk was anything but. There were craftsmen shaping metal into jewelry, builders stacking bricks in organized grids, sailors pushing boats down canals that snaked through the city like watery veins. There were laws, contracts, marriages, arguments, births, funerals, all the messy, beautiful business of being human. And it was all happening here for the very first time at this scale. Urban planning wasn't an abstract idea. It was practiced. Buildings aligned in planned districts. Public spaces designed to accommodate traffic, human and animal. Granaries and warehouses built with airflow in mind to keep contents dry. They even had early forms of zoning. Some areas were for administration, some for crafts, some for homes, and it's all so familiar. That's what's eerie about walking through Uruk in your mind. It feels like a city, not a palace, not a shrine, a city, complete with its own politics, rituals, and gossip. People lived in multi-room homes with central courtyards. They had kitchens and ovens, wells and drainage channels. They didn't just survive, they organized their survival into routines and systems. Life was structured, but not rigid. There was room for ceremony and chaos, for festivals honoring the gods, for street vendors shouting prices, for disputes over fences and grazing rights. And then there's that epic, again, the Epic of Gilgamesh, traced back to this very soil. Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king who built the walls of Uruk, who sought immortality after the death of his best friend, who argued with gods and wrestled monsters only to learn the most human lesson of all: you don't beat death. You live fully while you can, and leave behind something worth remembering. The walls of Uruk were his legacy, but so was the city itself. And as you wander past courtyards, ziggurats, and storage rooms, you realize something. This place wasn't just a first, it was a blueprint, Every city that came after borrowed something from Uruk. The idea that people could gather in one place, build something lasting, organize resources, preserve memory that started here. We owe it traffic jams, taxes, office jobs, and crowded markets, but also art, law, writing, trade, celebration, architecture. It's all here in Uruk, embedded in mud brick and myth. And maybe most impressive, they did it all without metal tools, without the wheel at first, without iron or steel, just clay reeds, water, and the will to try something new. So tonight, as the modern world hums outside your window, take a moment to picture that first great city, not the king, not the war, but the scribe, sitting in the shade, tablet in lap, stylus in hand, recording a delivery of fish to the temple. Because that moment, mundane fleeting, is what made everything else possible. You're standing in a dim stone chamber, cool air brushing your skin as you shift nervously in your sandals. Across from you, a bearded man with stern eyes raises a clay tablet and squints at it. He clears his throat. Then slowly, calmly, he reads the law you've just broken. You flinch because you already know the punishment. You botched a surgery, a fairly routine one really, set a broken arm, something you've done a dozen times before. But this time, the patient lost sensation, maybe more. The family's furious. And the judge, well, he's got his own book of rules. Or rather a giant pillar of them. You've met Hammurabi's code. And under it, if a doctor causes serious harm while treating a nobleman, the penalty is losing the offending hand. Yeah, you might want to start learning to write left-handed. The Code of Hammurabi, created around 1754 BCE in ancient Babylon, is one of the oldest and most complete sets of written laws we've ever found. Etched into a basalt stele over 7 feet tall, it contains nearly 300 rules that governed everything from trade disputes to marriage arrangements to, you guessed it, medical malpractice. What's wild is how detailed it is. This wasn't some vague list of be nice and don't steal. It was specific, unequivocal, brutal. If a builder constructs a house and it collapses and kills the owner, the builder shall be put to death. If it kills the owner's son, the builder's son shall be put to death. If a man puts out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. Yes, we're talking about the original eye for an eye system, and it wasn't symbolic. It was enforced. Now, before you dive under the covers, clutching your modern legal rights, like a teddy bear, take a deep breath. These laws weren't all horrific. Some were actually oddly fair. The code differentiated between classes, yes, which is problematic, but it also introduced a system of predictable justice. Before Hammurabi, justice often came down to whoever had the bigger stick or the closer family ties to someone important. But this stele, it said, here are the rules. You mess up, this is what happens. In its own terrifying way, it was a step toward accountability. Doctors had to take responsibility. Builders had to ensure safety. Merchants had to be honest. Contracts had weight. And that idea that society should be governed by written, agreed-upon rules is one of civilization's most lasting legacies. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Some of the penalties were economic, not physical. If a surgeon caused the death of a poor man's slave, the doctor only had to pay compensation. If he treated a free man and succeeded, he'd be rewarded handsomely, 10 shekels of silver, more than a laborer might earn in years. Success paid, failure punished. And somewhere in all this, is a primitive form of informed consent. The law distinguishes between performing a surgery and doing it without cause. There's even a line about unauthorized incisions. You didn't just get to cut someone open because you felt like practicing. You needed a reason. And you needed results. Historians still debate whether these laws were enforced as rigidly as they were written. Was the doctor always punished with amputation? Probably not. Many scholars believe the stele was more about broadcasting ideals, putting the fear of law into citizens, than carrying out each clause word for word. Still, the fact that medical errors were codified at all says something remarkable. People had expectations for healthcare. That's not something we always associate with the ancient world. We think of shamans and bleeding rituals. But here, 3,700 years ago, someone was saying, if you cut me open and mess it up, you better believe there are consequences. And that means they expected healing, recovery, expertise. Babylonian doctors weren't just spiritual figures, they were professionals, educated in temples, trained in herbal medicine surgery and diagnosis. They had manuals passed down orally or scratched into clay listing symptoms and recommended treatments. And yet, there was no license, no malpractice insurance, no hospital board, only the code and the looming threat of someone quoting line 218, if the physician performs a major operation on a man and causes his death, his hands shall be cut off. Talk about performance pressure. But Hammurabi's code didn't stop at medicine. It regulated commerce, marriage, agriculture, wages, and even rent control. A field flooded by neglect, compensation owed. A dishonest merchant caught shortchanging a customer, death. A husband who falsely accuses his wife of adultery, he gets punished. Justice was sharp, but not blind. And the most symbolic part, that the laws were written in stone, not just metaphorically, but literally. The stele was placed in public. Anyone who could read could see it. It was a contract visible to all. That idea, that law must be transparent, is something we still hold dear today. So as you drift toward sleep, picture that black basalt pillar standing under the Babylonian sun. Picture the crowd gathering around it, pointing, whispering, reading. Some terrified, some relieved, and all of them seeing, maybe for the first time, that the rules weren't just in the hands of the powerful. They were out in the open, etched forever, and waiting to be tested by time. It's nighttime. You're in ancient Babylon, but the stars above look strangely familiar. The same constellations still glimmer. Orion, the Pleiades, the sweeping curve of the Milky Way, like spilled salt across black velvet. A chill in the air brushes your skin as you look up and then down to a clay tablet in your lap. You're holding a sky chart, a kind of spreadsheet in cuneiform, and it's telling you something wild. There's going to be a lunar eclipse next month. Maybe even the exact day. You blink. Then you glance back at the heavens. No telescopes, no supercomputers, just you, the stars, and a remarkable amount of math. Because this is the brilliance of the Babylonian astronomers. Long before Newton, Copernicus, or Galileo, these ancient stargazers figured out how to predict eclipses, not by divine revelation, but through careful, excruciating observation. And they recorded it all in neat rows of wedge-shaped impressions baked into clay. Let's talk about the Saros cycle. It sounds like something you'd hear in a fantasy novel, but it's real. It's a period of about 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. After one Saros, the sun, earth, and moon return to roughly the same relative geometry, meaning an eclipse that happened once will happen again, just shifted in location. Babylonian astronomers discovered this cycle thousands of years ago. They didn't know why it worked, not in a heliocentric sense, but they knew it did. They watched the skies every night, charted each moon phase, every strange shadow that crossed the moon's face. They noticed the pattern. They named it. They wrote it down. That's science. Not flashy, not loud, just patient observation repeated over centuries. The result? A kind of ancient almanac that could predict lunar eclipses, some even argue solar eclipses, with shocking accuracy. These predictions were important not just for curiosity, but for statecraft, religion, and agriculture. Eclipses were ominous, terrifying. To the untrained eye, they looked like omens of doom. A blood moon. The gods are angry. The sun disappears. The world is ending. But if a priest astronomer could look up from his tablet and say, "Don't panic." This happened 18 years ago. It'll pass. That was power. That was calm. That was control over the uncontrollable. And Babylonian astronomers held that power like a steady flame. They worked in ziggurats, those step temple towers that doubled as observatories. From these heights, they mapped the stars, the paths of Venus and Jupiter, the sudden flashes of comets. Some tablets even contain records of supernovae, bright, short-lived stars that appeared then faded, leaving future historians scratching their heads in wonder. But the stars weren't just for predicting the sky. They were also used to measure time plan festivals and anchor mythology. The zodiac as we know it owes a great debt to the Babylonians. The 12 signs originated with their division of the sky into equal zones. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, they didn't invent the personalities, but they mapped the sky. In a way, they invented the idea that the cosmos had an order, that the heavens weren't just a chaotic swirl of lights, but a clockwork of cycles and patterns. And more importantly, that humans could read them. And here's a little odd fact to carry with you. They didn't just observe the sky. They named things. For instance, the planet Venus was called Ishtar after their goddess of love and war. Jupiter Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. Their science and their religion weren't at odds. They coexisted, layered like the stars behind clouds. But this wasn't easy work. These weren't backyard astronomers with telescopes and iced tea. They were scholars hunched over wax-coated wooden boards, using reed styluses, charting data with obsessive precision. One miscalculation could throw off an entire cycle. And still, they got it right more often than not. What's more impressive is how long this knowledge was preserved. Babylonian astronomical texts influenced the Greeks, especially after Alexander the Great's conquest. Hellenistic astronomers like Hipparchus and later Ptolemy borrowed heavily from Babylonian methods. Even in Renaissance Europe, scholars reference Chaldean wisdom, a romantic name for ancient Mesopotamian star studies. In short, the Babylonians didn't just gaze at the stars. They organized them. So tonight, as you lie beneath your own modern night sky, cut up by streetlights, airplane trails, and phone notifications, know this: long before telescopes, long before satellites, there were people sitting quietly on rooftop temples, staring upward for hours, nights, years, just watching, counting, remembering. They weren't looking for meaning in a metaphorical sense. They were looking for patterns. They weren't predicting your personality. They were predicting shadows, eclipses, cosmic alignments, and they were often right. So next time the moon disappears behind Earth's shadow and someone nearby gasps or points upward, you'll remember the ones who first knew it was coming. Not through magic, not through myth, but through clay and stars and time. You're walking through a quiet grove, the scent of olives hanging in the air. The path is narrow and soft beneath your sandals, but something's bothering you. Up ahead, the trail winds toward a lush field, a perfect shortcut, but the man beside you, draped in a plain white robe, stops abruptly. His face goes pale. "No," he whispers, backing away. "We can't go through there." You squint. "Why not? It's just beans." And he stares at you, like you've just suggested kicking a puppy. "They have souls," he says. "Welcome to the strange and sacred world of Pythagoras, the man whose name you probably associate with the formula A2 plus B2 was a C2, and not say a full-blown phobia of legumes. But that's the joy of ancient history. It's full of geniuses who are also somehow incredibly weird. Let's start with what we think we know about Pythagoras. He was a 6th century BCE philosopher and mathematician from the island of Samos, though he spent much of his life in southern Italy. He's credited with discovering the mathematical relationship between the sides of a right triangle, developing theories of harmony in music, and influencing future philosophers from Plato to, well, everybody. But here's the twist. Pythagoras wasn't just a math guy. He was the head of a mystical cult, a secretive, ritual-heavy brotherhood that believed numbers were divine, and reality was ultimately a series of cosmic equations. To Pythagoreans, math wasn't just useful, it was sacred. Numbers had personalities, ratios revealed truths, and through mathematics, they believed you could understand the entire universe. Oh, and they were vegetarians, mostly, with one key exception: no beans. This wasn't a dietary preference. It was doctrine. Pythagoreans believed that beans, especially fava beans, were spiritually charged, linked to the soul, the underworld, and possibly even reincarnation. Some ancient sources claim they believed beans contained souls. Others suggest that beans symbolize the gateway between life and death, or that their hollow stems allowed souls to travel through the earth like tiny elevators to the afterlife. There are even theories that Pythagoras thought the inside of a bean looked like, brace yourself, a developing human embryo. And once you've made that connection, lunch becomes a moral crisis. So when Pythagoras refused to walk through a field of beans, it wasn't just eccentricity. It was a matter of spiritual hygiene, a test of cosmic obedience. In fact, legend has it that this obsession cost him his life. According to one dramatic version of the story, Pythagoras was fleeing a mob, likely political enemies, not math haters, and he came to a bean field. Trapped, he had two choices: run through the beans and escape, or stop and face his fate. He stopped. They caught him. And just like that, the father of triangles was no more. Historians still debate whether that story's true. Some say it's a metaphor meant to emphasize his devotion to principle. Others think it was ancient satire, a way of poking fun at his peculiarities. Either way, it captures the vibe. Pythagoras was brilliant and also deeply, profoundly Pythagorean. His cult followed strict rules: silence for 5 years during training, abstaining from animal sacrifice, wearing only white, daily self-examinations to judge whether you'd improved morally. They weren't just students, they were initiates, and not everyone got in. The school was called the Acousmatikoi, literally the listeners, because most of them didn't question or debate. They listened, quietly, reverently. If Pythagoras said beans were forbidden, then beans were forbidden. End of story. This reverence extended to numbers. The number 1 symbolized unity. 2 was duality. 3, perfection. 10 divine harmony. They visualized numbers using tetractys, a triangle composed of 10 dots arranged in 4 rows. To them, it wasn't just geometry, it was the breath of the cosmos. This mystical approach to math might sound bizarre, but it wasn't totally out of step for the time. Ancient thinkers often blurred the lines between science, religion, and philosophy. What makes Pythagoras stand out is how committed he was to the blur. He treated math like meditation, discovery like revelation. And yet, despite all the ritual and restriction, his ideas changed the world. The Pythagorean theorem isn't just school trivia, it's foundational to geometry, architecture, astronomy, and engineering. It gave us a new way of thinking about space and relationships. His work on musical intervals, figuring out that strings of different lengths produce harmonious notes in simple ratios, formed the basis of Western music theory. He looked at vibrating strings and saw math. He looked at the sky and saw proportion. He looked at beans and saw something apparently so horrifying that he wouldn't touch them. That's the duality of Pythagoras. He's the guy who gave us a formula so intuitive that school children memorize it in song, and also the guy who might have run from a salad. But maybe that's the point. Maybe greatness doesn't always come in neat packages. Maybe the same mind that sees the secret ratios behind harmony also finds terror in a field of legumes. Genius isn't always rational. Sometimes it's ruled by patterns only the genius can see. So tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, picture Pythagoras in his white robes, drawing triangles in the sand, muttering sacred ratios to himself, while a stew bubbles behind him. No beans, thank you. Picture him refusing to take the easy path, even when it meant the end. And picture his students gathered in a circle, listening without speaking, waiting to hear which number would be holy next. Because in the end, whether you believe in the soul of a bean or not, the man made his mark. And triangles have never been the same. You're on a rocky coastline, the kind that smells like salt and seaweed, where the air has that constant tang of tide pools and barnacles. The sun is rising low behind you, casting a soft glow on the ancient Mediterranean water. You take a step closer to a cluster of shells, small, rough, and unassuming, and you suddenly understand you are standing at the origin of royal purple. But don't picture a soft lavender or dusty plum. This was Tyrian purple, a color so vivid, so impossibly rich, that for centuries it became a symbol of power. It wasn't just a favorite. It was forbidden to all but the elite. Roman emperors, Byzantine bishops, Persian kings, they all wanted their robes dyed in this exact hue. And to get it, they had to crush snails. Thousands of them, specifically sea snails from the Murex genus. They weren't pretty. In fact, they looked like angry barnacles with armor. But inside each snail was a tiny gland that produced a yellowish secretion. Not much to look at until you exposed it to sunlight and air. Then it changed. Oxidation kicked in. The goo turned green, then blue. Then slowly, like magic, it shifted into a deep, luminous purple. Not bright like neon, but dark, intense with an almost metallic depth, like velvet soaked in dusk. The process disgusting. Ancient dye makers would collect thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of these snails. They'd break the shells open, extract the glands, and let them ferment in massive vats under the hot sun. The smell was unbearable. Ancient sources say the stench clung to your clothes and hair. Entire cities reeked from the production, especially Tyre, the Phoenician city, where the practice thrived. Some historians speculate that certain neighborhoods were permanently downwind because nobody else wanted to live near them. But the payoff was worth it. 1 ounce of Tyrian purple could cost more than its weight in gold. That's not hyperbole. This was luxury concentrated. If you were wearing it, you were important, possibly sacred. In fact, Roman law at one point restricted the color to emperors alone. Mere mortals caught wearing it could be fined, exiled, even executed. That's how powerful color became. It wasn't just about looking fancy. It was about control, identity, status. To wear purple was to say, I have wealth, yes, but also divine favor, imperial privilege, and more snails than you could ever hope to smash. And here's the odd fact that sticks with you: the color didn't fade. Unlike most ancient dyes, which dulled with sun and washing, Tyrian purple deepened. It became more beautiful over time. The pigment bonded with the fabric at a molecular level, literally fusing with the cloth. Imagine a robe that gets better the longer you wear it. No dry cleaning necessary. That durability made it a perfect metaphor. Kings didn't just want to look rich. They wanted to look eternal. And the process wasn't fully understood for centuries. It was closely guarded, passed down like a family recipe with horrific ingredients. Every step mattered: where you harvested the snails, how long you let them rot, even the kind of vessel you used to ferment them. Some scholars think they used lead vats to get the right chemical balance. Others believe the snails were boiled alive to preserve the glands. Historians still debate which technique was most effective. Some ancient texts describe using urine to trigger the reaction. Others mention adding ash wine or herbs to tweak the tone. It was both science and sorcery, early chemistry masked as ritual. What we do know is this: the demand never slowed. From Tyre, the dye spread across the Mediterranean. It reached Egypt, where it adorned royal linen. It traveled to Rome, where it drenched the togas of senators and emperors. It found its way into Byzantine iconography, Christ himself often painted, wearing a cloak of Tyrian purple, a symbol of divinity wrapped in snail goop. And when Constantinople fell in 1453, the secret began to fade. Slowly, quietly. The technique was lost, like so many other ancient skills, swallowed by time and cheaper alternatives. Modern scientists only recently rediscovered the full process, and yes, they confirmed it's still gross. But here's what lingers. This was more than a color. It was an idea. That something rare, something hard-won, something no ordinary person could afford or even endure to produce could become a symbol of something higher. And maybe that's the strange lesson of Tyrian purple. That beauty in the ancient world was often inconvenient. It stank. It stained your hands. It took patience, labor, and probably several ruined tunics. But once you had it, you had power. So tonight, as you settle deeper beneath your covers, picture the shoreline again. The tide pulling back. A basket of glistening shells dumped onto a slab of rock. The pop of each one cracking open. A dye maker squinting into the sun, watching that impossible shade bloom beneath his fingertips. Not just purple. History. It's 1750 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia, and someone is furious. Not angry. In the quiet, passive-aggressive way. No, this man is absolutely steaming. His name is Nanny, and he's had it with lousy customer service. So what does he do? Storm into the manager's office. Start a shouting match in the marketplace. Nope. He does something infinitely more permanent. He chisels his complaint, his entire complaint, onto a clay tablet. Congratulations. You're now reading the world's oldest customer complaint. Here's the story. Nanny ordered a shipment of copper ingots from a merchant named Ea-Nasir. Sounds simple enough, right? Copper was big business in the Bronze Age. It was the lifeblood of tools, weapons, and trade. But what Nanny received wasn't premium, shiny, well-forged copper. It was junk, substandard, and inferior in his own words. And that wasn't even the worst part. Apparently, when Nanny's messenger arrived to complain, he was treated rudely by Ea-Nasir's staff. Denied access to the warehouse, shouted at, maybe even humiliated. So Nanny, instead of letting it go or grumbling about it over a warm barley beer, sat down with a clay tablet and inscribed one of the most satisfying pieces of passive-aggressive fury history has ever preserved. He writes, "Tell Ea-Nasir Nani sends the following message. When you came, you said to me as follows, I will give Gimil-Sin, your servant, fine quality copper ingots. But you gave me ingots, which were not good. You treated my messenger with contempt. I shall not accept here any copper from you that is not of fine quality. It's the Bronze Age equivalent of a 1-star Yelp review. In cuneiform, and it's glorious. There's no flowery language, no poetic metaphor, just pure transactional rage. Nanny wants what he paid for, and he wants it now. He even throws in a threat he won't do business with Ea-Nasir ever again. Unless, of course, Ea-Nasir gets his act together. What makes this moment so amazing isn't just the tone, it's the familiarity. You've been there. Wrong item, bad service, no apology. You've written the angry email, the irate return request. You've whispered never again while crumpling a receipt in the parking lot. Nanny did all that but in clay, which means his frustration has lasted for nearly 4,000 years. Archaeologists found the tablet in the ruins of modern-day Iraq. It wasn't in a palace. It wasn't buried with gold. It was just sitting among other tablets in what was probably Ea-Nasir's home or office. Some speculate he had a whole pile of these complaints and simply never threw them out, either because he was lazy or maybe because he just didn't care. And let's be real, Ea-Nasir might have been the kind of guy who always cut corners. Multiple other complaint tablets have been found with his name on them. This wasn't a one-off bad day. This was a pattern. It's comforting in a weird way. We think of the ancient world as a place of heroic deeds and grand myths. But here's the truth. People were still getting ripped off, still writing strongly worded messages, still rolling their eyes at merchants who promised one thing and delivered another. And the complaint isn't just emotional, it's logistical. Nanny mentions shipping routes, contracts, storage issues. He's not being petty. He's documenting the breakdown of an entire trade agreement, and he wants it fixed. In fact, this moment is a window into a sophisticated commercial system. Long-distance trade was complex. Copper might have been mined in Oman, shipped across the Persian Gulf, processed in workshops, then delivered to cities like Ur. That required accounting, transportation, labor quality control, and clearly a dispute resolution process. The very fact that Nanny wrote a complaint instead of resorting to violence or legal action suggests there was a system. Whether it worked is another matter. But the idea of a written grievance was there. This is the beginning of accountability in commerce, and think about the permanence of it. A modern bad review disappears into the digital ether. But Nanny's complaint, it was pressed into clay, dried in the sun, and preserved by time itself. The Babylonian version of this meeting is being recorded for quality assurance purposes. You can almost picture Nasir reading it, sighing, and tossing it onto his complaint pile. Or, maybe more realistically, just ignoring it altogether. Some things, unfortunately, never change. But here's the beauty of it: Nanny's voice survived. His indignation was baked into the record. Long after his copper oxidized and crumbled, his words remained sharp. Cranky, maybe, but sharp. And now, as you lie back, eyes heavy, you're imagining a world of cuneiform customer service. Merchants with clay filing cabinets, delivery men dodging angry clients, shady dealers trying to pass off subpar tin as bronze, and somewhere always someone like Nanny, fed up, articulate, and ready to write. Because in the end, the smallest moments tell the biggest stories. A complaint about copper becomes a reminder that ancient people weren't statues or mythic figures. They were us. Picky, proud, punctual, and very, very tired of getting bad service. It's noisy. Not chaos, not panic, just the layered rhythmic buzz of a thriving market. You step into a plaza and are immediately surrounded by the scent of roasted maize, drying chilies, and something rich and slightly bitter: cacao. You glance around. Everywhere, people are moving, trading, bartering, chatting, and nobody's using coins. Welcome to Tlatelolco, the grand market of the Aztecs, and possibly the most organized, efficient, and sophisticated economic system the ancient world has ever seen. Forget the Hollywood version of the Aztecs for a minute. Put down the obsidian blades and dramatic sacrifices. This is what real daily life looked like: structured, bustling, and shockingly modern. At its peak, the Tlatelolco market served up to 60,000 shoppers per day. That's not a farmer's market. That's a Wall Street meets Walmart level of commerce. And what were they trading? Everything. Beans, salt, feathers, obsidian knives, sandals, firewood, avocados, animal pelts, tortillas, even live turkeys. You could also buy slaves, though they were treated more like indentured workers, often selling themselves temporarily to repay debts. Every item had its value, its purpose, and more impressively, its price. Because the Aztecs didn't just eyeball value. They had a full-blown currency system. The most common form, cacao beans. Yes, chocolate was literal money. You could buy a tamale for a handful of cacao, a rabbit for about 100 beans, a turkey hen closer to 300. And for big-ticket items, like a cloak made of woven cotton, you'd need something sturdier, like quaxley-long cloth strips used like high-value bills. Want to haggle? Go for it, but you'd better do it politely, because this market was regulated. Watchmen patrolled the grounds. Tax collectors lurked near the edges. Special judges, yes, market judges, sat under shaded awnings ready to resolve disputes on the spot. If you shortchanged someone, if your maize was spoiled, if your cacao was counterfeit, yes, people tried that. There were immediate consequences. That's not a marketplace. That's a micro-government, and it was respected. When the Spanish conquistadors first arrived, even hardened men like Hernán Cortés were stunned. One of his companions, Bernal Diaz, wrote about Tlatelolco with open awe, comparing it favorably to European cities. They'd never seen anything so large, so organized, so civilized. This wasn't just commerce, it was culture. The market wasn't a side event. It was the center of Aztec urban life. People gathered not just to buy goods, but to exchange news, arrange marriages, hear gossip, and discuss politics. A kind of social media, but with more corn, and the rules ran deep. Vendors were grouped by specialty. You didn't just find food. You found the avocado section the chili aisle, the herbal medicine row. Weaponsmiths weren't next to fishmongers. You wouldn't find firewood next to flower garlands. It was all zoned, planned, and maintained. Even taxes were handled with precision. Provinces in the Aztec Empire paid tributes not just in goods, but often in market-suitable forms: cacao jade, obsidian, and fine textiles. These flowed into the capital and out again through merchant guilds that controlled supply quality, and even, believe it or not, branding. Aztec merchants, known as Pozteca, weren't just traders. They were diplomats, spies, and elite businessmen rolled into one. They traveled long distances to acquire rare goods: turquoise from the north, jade from the south, feathers from tropical birds, and often returned with not just merchandise, but intelligence. If a neighboring city-state looked a little too prosperous or too militarized, the Pozteca would take note. They were so important that they had their own gods, their own laws, and their own internal tribunals. Offend a Pozteca, and you weren't just messing with a merchant, you were crossing a powerful network. And while all this sounds intricate, it was rooted in practicality. Aztec society depended on the market for survival. It fed cities, it clothed armies, it balanced regions. And for a civilization without wheels, draft animals, or metal tools, the efficiency is jaw-dropping. Let's not forget they carried everything by foot. Massive networks of couriers, porters, and traders moving goods from mountain valleys to lakeside cities without wagons or oxen. Just bundles on backs and a mental map of every trade route in the empire. And the glue that held it all together: trust, backed by law, enforced by custom. Cacao beans might seem cute as currency, but the Aztecs took it seriously. Beans were inspected. Fake ones emptied and refilled or smoothed over with mud were grounds for punishment. Not jail, something swifter. Fines, public shaming, beatings. This wasn't the Wild West. This was an economy with teeth, and while it wasn't capitalist in the modern sense, it had free market dynamics. Prices fluctuated. Demand shaped production. Innovation was rewarded. You had entrepreneurs, wholesalers, importers. You also had consumer protection long before anyone called it that. So tonight, as you fall deeper into rest, imagine the hum of a pre-dawn market in Tenochtitlan, the shuffle of sandals on stone, the smell of tamales in clay pots, a merchant arranging his beans in perfect rows, a flower seller braiding her garlands, a judge sipping a tole in the shade waiting for the first dispute of the day. And remember, civilization isn't just measured by temples and wars. Sometimes it's in the receipt, the bartering, the shared understanding that this thing has value and that thing costs 10 cacao. And if someone cheats you, there's a man for that. You're standing in a courtyard in Luoyang, China. The year is 132 CE. The sky is bright, birds are chirping, and all seems calm. But inside, one large bronze vessel, resting in the middle of the courtyard, something shifts. You don't hear it, but deep within the mechanism, a small metal ball drops silently into the mouth of a bronze toad. Clink. Just like that someone knows an earthquake has occurred. And not just any earthquake, it happened hundreds of miles away. You've just witnessed the activation of the world's first seismoscope, invented nearly 2,000 years ago by a Chinese scientist named Jang Heng. And no, it didn't beep. It didn't flash. It dropped a ball into a toad's mouth. Let's break that down. Jang Heng was a polymath, an astronomer, engineer, poet, and mathematician who lived during the Han Dynasty. His seismoscope wasn't shaped like a machine, but like a large bronze urn. Around its sides were 8 dragon heads, each pointing in a different direction, north, south, east, west, and all the diagonals in between. Beneath each dragon sat a toad, mouth open, waiting. Inside the urn was a complex pendulum mechanism, likely a weighted rod that could swing in response to vibrations. When a distant tremor reached the device, the pendulum would shift just slightly, triggering a lever system that released a metal ball from one of the dragon mouths. The ball would fall into the corresponding toad's mouth, indicating the direction of the quake's origin. No sirens, no smoke, just the unmistakable sound of a marble dropping clink. That was your signal to start evacuating. What makes this so extraordinary isn't just the mechanical genius, it's the sensitivity. Jang Heng's device could detect earthquakes hundreds of kilometers away, even when the local ground didn't visibly shake. One famous account says that the device once indicated a quake in the west, even though nobody in Luoyang felt a thing. Days later, messengers arrived, confirming that yes, a major earthquake had struck a province hundreds of miles away, and the court was stunned. Before this, earthquakes were seen as omens, messages from heaven, punishment from ancestors. They were terrifying and mysterious, and almost always reported after the destruction. But here was a man calmly watching bronze balls fall into toads' mouths and saying, yes, an earthquake. West of here. That kind of early warning system wasn't just new, it was revolutionary. Jang Heng himself was a fascinating figure. He studied astronomy, developing models of the heavens that incorporated celestial spheres and shadow calculations. He wrote poetry that merged science with spiritual reflection. He even built one of the earliest rotating celestial globes powered by water. Think of it like a mechanical planetarium in the 2nd century, but the seismoscope remains his most curious invention. Because while others looked to the stars, Jang Heng listened to the ground. And he did it with dragons, no less. There's no surviving original of the seismoscope, only written descriptions. But modern engineers have recreated it based on those accounts. And guess what? It works. Tests using simulated seismic waves have shown that such a device could in fact detect directional vibrations with remarkable accuracy. Now, of course, modern seismology has advanced into a full-blown science. We've got sensors buried in fault lines, satellites monitoring tectonic shifts, digital alarms that warn entire cities. But Jang Heng's machine remains poetic, a delicate, artistic, animal-shaped oracle that responds to forces we can't see. And here's a delightful odd fact. The bronze dragons weren't just for show. Each was carefully calibrated. Their placement around the urn allowed for directional accuracy. So if the ball dropped from the southeast dragon's mouth, emergency teams, imperial messengers with scrolls and horses would be sent in that direction. It wasn't just there was an earthquake, it was there was one there. That's astonishing foresight. Even today, we struggle to predict earthquakes. We can detect them, yes, but forecasting is elusive. The best systems warn us seconds before the wave hits. Jang Heng couldn't give you advance notice, but he could tell you where to look. And sometimes that's just as valuable, because earthquakes aren't just moments, they're patterns. If you know where they've happened, you can anticipate what might happen next, and it makes you think. Imagine being an imperial official in Han China, walking into a quiet courtyard and hearing a single ball drop. You'd freeze. Everyone would. The emperor himself might stop mid-sentence. Clink, a dragon has spoken. A tremor has whispered through the earth. Go west, It wasn't a prophecy, it was physics, disguised as magic, wrapped in bronze. And now, as you settle into your bed, with the floor blessedly still beneath you, remember the man who watched the invisible forces of the world and decided they were knowable. That even something as chaotic as the earth shaking could be measured, not with explosions, not with alarms, with dragons and toads and one small perfect sound. Clink! You're staring into the face of a mask, not a decorative one, not made for festivals or theater, but something far more intimate. It's molded to fit a human face perfectly, smooth contoured, not carved from wood or cast in bronze, but made of plaster and linen layer upon layer. It covers the nose, the mouth, the brow, every curve. And beneath it lies a body, or what's left of one. You're in ancient Egypt, and you're looking at one of the earliest known medical prosthetics. But it's not a fake toe this time. This time, it's a facial reconstruction part of the mummification process, not just to preserve, but to restore. Because for the ancient Egyptians, the body mattered. Even in death, they believed that your soul, your Ka, needed to recognize your body in the afterlife, which meant it had to be complete, intact, familiar. And if time or trauma had taken something, an ear, a jaw, a nose, the embalmers would build it back. Sculpted carefully, with linen soaked in resin and gum-shaped over bones like a surgeon with a chisel. In some cases, they even inserted glass eye shell teeth or artificial limbs. One priestess was found with a painted toe replacement so finely crafted it looked real under the wrappings. Not for function, she was long past walking, but for identity. Because the gods expected you to show up whole. And this wasn't a luxury reserved for pharaohs. It extended into the middle class, especially during the later dynasties. The embalmers were artisans, doctors, and spiritual technicians rolled into one. They didn't just wrap a corpse. They reconstructed a person, and they were good at it. So good, in fact, that modern CT scans have revealed layers of detail, once invisible gold foil, behind eye sockets, delicate padding around shattered cheekbones, replacement parts sculpted with terrifying precision. Some mummies look better than the people likely did in life, but that raises a strange question. Where's the line between preservation and recreation? Was the mummy still the person it used to be? Or had it become something else? A symbol, a proxy, a spiritual statue? Historians still debate this. Were the cosmetic reconstructions just about respect? Or were they part of a deeper metaphysical requirement? The ancient texts give us hints. The Book of the Dead, a sort of guidebook to the afterlife, instructs the soul to declare itself pure and whole. I have not defiled my body. I have not corrupted my image. There's a sense that the physical form mattered as much as the moral one. And this wasn't just belief. It was ritualized practice. The opening of the mouth ceremony, for example, was performed after mummification. A priest would touch the lips, eyes, and ears of the deceased with special tools to reawaken their senses, symbolically restoring speech, sight, and hearing so the person could live again in the next world. Imagine that. A body perfectly preserved, gently repaired, and then ritually rebooted like an ancient operating system. Life 2.0 now, with updated features, and all of it rooted in a single haunting truth. You mattered enough to be made whole again, even in death. But here's where things get even stranger. In some cases, embalmers weren't just reconstructing what had been lost, they were enhancing, adding volume to sunken features, redefining the jawline, padding the chest. Think of it as ancient post-mortem cosmetic surgery. And yes, scholars have found mummies with what can only be described as plaster six-packs. Because if you're going to meet the gods, you might as well show up looking good. Not all civilizations shared this obsession with bodily perfection in death. The Greeks and Romans were more focused on memorials and inscriptions. The Chinese honored ancestors with offerings and altars. But Egypt doubled down on the form itself. They wrapped stuffed, painted, and preserved the human shape with unmatched devotion. And it lasted. To this day, you can walk into a museum and stare into the face of someone who lived 3,000 years ago. Eyes closed, skin, taut lips set in a soft, ambiguous expression. Not alive, not exactly, but not gone either. The reconstruction wasn't just for the soul, it was also for us, proof that someone cared, that the final image mattered, that death wasn't the end of identity. It was a continuation, frozen in linen and resin. And here's a quiet, odd fact to carry with you. Embalmers left little notes sometimes, amulets placed strategically, a ring hidden under a bandage, spells written on papyrus and inserted between layers. Not for display, not even for the family, just for the gods. Or maybe just for the deceased, because when you build a face from fragments, you're not just preserving someone, you're talking to them, saying, I see you, I remember you, and I will carry you forward. So tonight, as your body softens into stillness, think of that ancient workshop filled with resin linen and candlelight, of careful hands sculpting a new nose, a new jaw, a final mask for a final journey. Not to hide the truth, but to bring it back. The room is filled with firelight, but there's no flickering flame, no torch, no candle, just a glow warm, steady, and very much under control. You squint inch closer and realize you're staring at something impossibly modern, a lampshade made of translucent stone perfectly fitted to a carved stand. The light, gentle and ambient, shines through thin slices of alabaster, and it's not from the 20th century. It's from ancient Nineveh, nearly 3,000 years ago. Welcome to the lost elegance of Assyrian interior, lighting a detail of daily life that rarely makes it into epic histories, but tells you so much about how people lived, not just ruled, fought, or built empires. Because while the Assyrians were known for their brutal conquests, their military precision, and their bas-reliefs of lion hunts and flayed enemies, they were also people who understood comfort, ambiance, design. They didn't just build palaces, they decorated them. They created atmosphere. And one of their secrets was stone lighting. Archaeologists excavating the palace of Ashurbanipal, the same king who built that epic clay tablet library, found carefully carved alabaster vessels and stone panels thin enough to let light pass through. Some had burn marks consistent with having held small flames. Others appeared to be lampshades, their delicate stone filters softening the glow of oil lamps placed inside. It's not just beautiful, it's smart. Alabaster, a soft mineral, is abundant in Mesopotamia. It's easy to carve, naturally translucent, and gives off a warm, creamy glow when lit from behind. The Assyrians took advantage of this, cutting paper-thin slabs and mounting them in fixtures to create diffused light, something we still strive for in modern interior design. And they didn't stop there. Wall niches in Assyrian palaces were built to hold these lights at specific heights. Floor plans show rooms that could be darkened or brightened, based on panel placements and oil lamp locations. The goal wasn't just illumination, it was mood. Now think about that. While Roman generals were still figuring out how to keep their torches from smoking out the banquet hall, Assyrian architects were installing custom lighting in throne rooms. But the real flex, the sculpted shadows. Many Assyrian walls were lined with limestone reliefs, massive carved scenes depicting royal hunts, divine encounters, and mythological creatures. When lit from below or behind those carvings came alive, shadows danced across the muscles of lions. Gods seemed to shimmer with divine energy, and the viewer standing in the flickering light wasn't just looking at art, they were inside it. That's immersive storytelling 700 BCE style. And it gets better. Some lighting artifacts were portable lamps with handles, alabaster cylinders that could be moved room to room. A few were suspended from ceilings with bronze chains. Others were embedded into altars or shrine walls, adding layers of symbolism, the divine light, eternal fire, the presence of the gods. Light wasn't just functional, it was spiritual. It guided prayers, illuminated sacred texts, protected the living, and honored the dead. In some rituals, oil lamps were burned, continuously watched over by temple priests who ensured the flame never died. Much like the eternal flames we still see today at monuments and memorials. But back to the palace, because this is where things feel eerily modern. Ashurbanipal's personal quarters, based on archaeological reconstructions, likely featured multiple zones, a reception room, a private lounge, maybe even a bedroom, with carefully controlled lighting. The alabaster panels didn't just serve as lampshades, they also acted as early dimmers. Swap out one panel for a thicker one, or move the lamp slightly farther back, and you had a softer glow. Interior design. Yeah, they had that. And it wasn't just elite luxury. Simpler alabaster lamps have been found in middle-class homes and temples throughout Assyria and Babylonia. Some were decorated, others plain. But the concept was the same: create a living space that didn't just function, but felt good to live in. And maybe that's what surprises us most. We expect ancient people to be practical, harsh, minimalist. We forget they had preferences, aesthetic tastes, a sense of what felt cozy. They didn't just want to see in the dark, they wanted to do it beautifully. Imagine walking through a palace corridor, torch in hand, and watching the walls slowly glow with a low golden light. You pass a lion carved into stone, and as the fire flickers, its eyes seem to blink. You step into the king's chamber, and the ceiling glows faintly, not from firelight bouncing off walls, but from within the walls themselves. That's not survival, that's atmosphere. So tonight, as you lie in the glow of a bedside lamp or the soft hum of your phone screen, remember that light has always been more than utility. It's comfort, it's presence. It's a kind of ancient glowing whisper, saying you are not alone in the dark. And somewhere buried deep beneath the ruins of Nineveh, a slab of alabaster still holds the memory of flame. You're walking through a canyon, but this one isn't carved by nature. It's carved by hands. Towering red sandstone walls rise on either side, smoothed by centuries of wind, but shaped unmistakably by chisels. As you pass into the shade, the silence presses in. And then there it is. A massive ornate facade looms above you, carved directly into the cliffside. Columns, pediments, intricate scrolls. And yet it's not a building. Not really. It's solid rock. There are no bricks, no stacked stones. This is Petra, the lost city of the Nabateans, and you've just stumbled into their most famous monument, Al-Khazne, the Treasury. And yes, it's even more impressive in person. Carved in the 1st century CE, the treasury is over 130 feet tall, yet made from a single slab of cliff. Not built from pieces. Not assembled. Excavated in reverse, like sculpting a house by digging down into a mountain and stopping only when everything was perfect. But here's the thing. The Nabateans weren't just showy architects. They were hydraulic engineers, genius ones, because Petra was built in the desert, and not the friendly kind of desert. This is southern Jordan, where rainfall is scarce, flash floods are dangerous, and every drop of water is precious. Yet somehow, this ancient city supported tens of thousands of people, lush gardens, fountains, and even public baths. How simple. They mastered water. Petra is an oasis by design. The Nabateans created a sprawling system of cisterns, canals, aqueducts, and reservoirs that caught, redirected, and stored every trickle of rain. They built dam walls to control floods, terracotta piping to carry water through rock tunnels, and ceramic settling tanks to purify it. Rainwater flowed down the mountains into carved channels hidden along cliff edges, then into tanks, some lined with waterproof plaster. Some were sealed, others open for community use. The whole system was gravity-powered, silent, sustainable, and built to last. One flash flood could refill an entire reservoir. One dry season could be survived because Petra didn't depend on rain. It planned for drought, and then there was their drinking water. The Nabateans were famous for filtering their water. Some pipes contained sand or gravel layers to trap sediment. Others used settling pools where heavier particles sank before the water moved on. Engineers even added gentle curves to pipelines to slow the flow, preventing erosion and allowing filtration. This wasn't a fluke. This was a water culture. And you could see it in their architecture. Many homes had water collection systems, gutters, small rooftop tanks, even decorative channels shaped like vines and animals. Their temples featured fountains. Their public squares had niches carved into walls where water could gently cascade into shallow pools. Some of it was sacred. Some of it was just good plumbing, and they protected it fiercely. Water theft was a serious offense. Access was controlled. Large reservoirs were locked behind stone doors sealed with inscriptions warning against misuse. To be a Nabatean engineer was to hold a position of high honor and responsibility, because Petra couldn't survive without trust, without shared effort. One cracked pipe could waste gallons. One diverted stream could ruin a neighborhood. Everyone had to play their part, and what did it give them in return? A blooming city in the middle of nowhere. Petra wasn't just a desert refuge, it was a trade capital. It sat at the crossroads of spice routes, incense trails, and caravan paths stretching from Arabia to the Mediterranean. Traders came from everywhere: Egypt, Rome, India, Damascus. They brought silk, frankincense, myrrh, ivory, and gold, and the Nabateans taxed it all. They built rest stops, warehouses, and custom stations. They offered water safety and hospitality to passing merchants. And in return, they grew rich, not through conquest or war, but through infrastructure. And that's what Petra really was, a masterpiece of infrastructure. Not just roads and walls, but systems. Things that worked quietly, reliably. Even the treasury, the big flashy rock-cut icon, was probably a tomb or ceremonial archive, not a bank. The real treasure of Petra wasn't gold. It was water, and maybe that's why it disappeared. When trade routes shifted and Roman influence grew, Petra began to decline. Earthquakes damaged the aqueducts. The cisterns cracked. The silence returned. By the time early explorers stumbled upon it centuries later, only the facades remained carved monuments without people. But beneath the dust, the channels are still there. So tonight, while the hum of pipes echoes faintly through your walls, think of Petra, a city that whispered to the rain, caught it mid-fall, and stored it like gold in the belly of stone. A place where every drop was a miracle, and every miracle engineered. You might not be able to carve a palace out of a cliff, but you can still build something that lasts. You feel the ground shift beneath you, not violently, just enough to notice. The stone seems to hum, subtly alive, and when you touch the wall beside you, it's warm. You're in the heart of an ancient city, but not one made of carved limestone or crumbling mud brick. No, this place is carved directly into volcanic rock, fused into the landscape like it was born there. Welcome to Derinkuyu, the underground city of ancient Cappadocia. And you are about 7 stories below the surface. Yes, 7. And it goes deeper. This isn't a basement. This isn't a bunker. This is a full-blown subterranean metropolis stretching over 280 feet deep, with at least 18 levels capable of housing 20,000 people, along with livestock food stores and fresh water. And the most amazing part, it's completely invisible from the surface. Derinkuyu is hidden under a modest Turkish town that for centuries had no idea what it was sitting on. Locals knew about a few carved chambers, sure, maybe a wine cellar or an old chapel. But it wasn't until the 1960s that a man knocking down a basement wall in his home accidentally opened a passage to an entire underground civilization. It sounds like fantasy, like something from a lost chapter of Indiana Jones. But this was real life, real stone, real people. And it wasn't just one city. The Cappadocian region of central Turkey is pockmarked with hundreds of underground complexes. Derinkuyu is simply the largest. Others like Kaymakli, Uzkanak, and Mazi dot the soft volcanic rock of the region, linked by narrow tunnels and escape routes, creating a honeycomb of hidden communities beneath the plains. But let's focus on Derinkuyu because it's a masterpiece. Carved by hand, one room at a time, over generations, the city contains everything a surface settlement might need. Kitchens, sleeping quarters, stables, chapels, schools, even a baptismal pool carved into solid rock. Ventilation shafts snake upward to keep air circulating. Stone wells, some still functional, reach down into aquifers, providing clean water even during siege. And then there are the doors. Circular stone doors, sometimes weighing up to 1,000 pounds, were carved to roll across narrow passageways and seal entire levels off from intruders. They only opened from the inside, turning the underground city into a secure fortress. These weren't random defenses. They were carefully planned, strategic, built with full knowledge that survival might one day depend on disappearing underground. But why build such a place? Historians still debate the original purpose. The region's soft, tough stone, created from compressed volcanic ash, made excavation easy, but required careful planning. The earliest tunnels may date back to the Hittites in the 2nd millennium BCE, though most of the known expansion happened during the early Christian era, around the 4th century CE. For centuries, people used Derinkuyu and its sister cities as refuges, hiding from invading armies, religious persecution, or natural disaster. From Persian raids to Roman crackdowns, from Arab invasions to Mongol conquests, the underground cities offered protection, community, and continuity in a world where danger often came over the next hill. You could live here for months. There were air shafts, $15,000 of them, some disguised as regular wells above ground. There were storage rooms, carved cool and dry, perfect for grains, wine, and olive oil. There were animal pens with specially designed troughs carved directly into the floor. Even toilets, little channels that led to deeper cesspools. Everything had its place, and it wasn't a cave. It was a designed environment. Rooms were often rectangular, with carved niches for oil lamps. Walls were smoothed and reinforced. Wider chambers opened into communal spaces like underground squares. Even classrooms have been identified where early Christians taught the gospel in secret hiding from hostile authorities above. Some levels were connected by narrow crawl spaces, just enough for one person to pass at a time. If you were being chased, that was your advantage. You'd know the tunnels. The enemy wouldn't. You'd roll the stone door shut behind you. Wait in silence. Let the world pass you by. Imagine the darkness, the quiet, the sound of breath in stone. Generations of families would have memorized every turn, every hallway. Children would have played beneath the surface like it was normal, because to them, it was. The underground wasn't a last resort. It was life. And in that darkness, you start to see something else: ingenuity. Without metal tools, without electricity, without blueprints or architects, these communities built structures so stable and efficient that they're still standing thousands of years later. Modern engineers are astonished by how well they hold up. No supports, no collapse, just good stone-carved smart. And when the threat passed, they returned to the surface, farmed, traded, lived their lives, until the next invasion or earthquake or drought drove them back below. Even today, some families still use parts of these tunnels for storage or shelter. Others remain sealed, unexplored. A few may still connect one city to another miles apart through lost passageways yet to be rediscovered. So tonight, as your room darkens and your breathing slows, picture a hidden city beneath your feet. Silent, waiting, carved with patience and care by people who refuse to be erased, not by war, not by fear, not by time. Because sometimes the greatest architecture isn't what you build above the earth. It's what you hide beneath it. You hear the thud of footsteps before you see them, tens of thousands of them. The earth vibrates, dust lifts from the dry ground, and a wave of identical faces emerges over the horizon. Not living men, but warriors frozen in time. Rows upon rows, standing in perfect formation, their brows, furrowed eyes locked ahead. Each one molded from clay, yet somehow deeply human. You're standing before the Terracotta Army, and the army is standing before you. There are over 8,000 soldiers here, plus 670 horses, 130 chariots, archers, generals, acrobats, musicians, even civil servants and clerks, all carved in life size, all buried in silence, and all made to protect one man, Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. When he died in 210 BCE, his funeral wasn't just about ceremony. It was about dominion. He didn't just want to go quietly into the next world, he wanted to march in, at the head of an empire, with his entire administration at his side. And he nearly pulled it off. The Terracotta Army wasn't meant to be seen. It was buried near the emperor's vast tomb complex, hidden under fields in Shanxi province for over 2,000 years. Locals stumbled upon it in 1974 while digging a well. What they unearthed was a soldier's face, then another, then a chamber the size of a warehouse filled wall to wall with warriors, each one unique. That's the eerie part. You'd expect mass production, row after row of identical statues stamped out like ceramic chess pieces. But no, the faces are different. the hairstyles vary, the armor types, the shoes, even the expressions, some grim, some thoughtful, some almost amused. These weren't statues, they were portraits, and they weren't molded from templates. Artisans sculpted each head, separately combining standard molds for ears, noses, and chins, then modifying them by hand. Some scholars believe they were based on real people, perhaps drawn from the emperor's actual army, or at least idealized versions of them. Because this wasn't just protection, it was a message. Qin Shi Huang had unified China after centuries of war. He standardized currency laws, even axle widths. He built roads, canals, and massive fortifications that would become part of the Great Wall. But his greatest obsession was order, structure, control, even in death. The Terracotta Army is that obsession made literal, an eternal military parade, still silent and perfectly aligned. And here's where it gets even stranger. We haven't found the emperor's actual tomb. It lies beneath a massive earthen mound nearby, unopened, untouched. Ancient texts say it contains rivers of mercury powered by mechanical streams, a model of the cosmos painted on the ceiling, traps to ward off intruders, the most advanced burial chamber ever conceived. And we've left it sealed. Why? Because soil samples around the tomb show extremely high levels of mercury. The ancient texts might be telling the truth. That's enough to make archaeologists cautious. The technology to excavate it safely without damaging artifacts or triggering decay may not even exist yet. So the emperor still sleeps, but his soldiers watch. They stand in covered pits, 4 massive ones so far, with more possibly undiscovered. Some are broken, others restored. Still, others remain partially buried, so researchers can study the original pigments that once coated them in vivid color. Yes, they were painted. Bright reds, blues, purples, even greens. Armor lacquered to shine. Faces with flushed cheeks and dark eyes. Imagine that. A full army, not in gray clay, but in full colorful regalia, marching toward eternity like it was just another drill. The paint flaked away within days of exposure to air. That's why most of the statues look monochrome now. But researchers are learning to preserve fragments using chemical sprays, controlled environments, and even 3D modeling. The goal isn't just to protect the army, it's to understand it, because behind every soldier is a sculptor, a blacksmith, a designer. Thousands of laborers worked on this project. Some estimate as many as 700,000 people were involved in constructing the full tomb complex, an effort that spanned decades. Some were prisoners, some were conscripted workers, and many may have died during the project, either from the brutal conditions or to keep the secrets buried. One ancient account claims that after the emperor's burial, artisans who knew too much were sealed inside with him. A chilling detail, but consistent with his need for control. Not even death could be left unmanaged, and yet there's beauty here too. Some of the figures are crouching archers, their heads tilted in mid-focus. Some are cavalrymen, gently holding reins. Others are clerks with their hands posed to write frozen mid-scroll. These weren't just warriors. They were citizens. An entire replica society entombed beneath the soil. And as eerie as it is, it's also deeply human. Qin Shi Huang wanted the afterlife to mirror the empire he built. Not an abstract paradise, but a functioning kingdom. He brought his guards, his advisors, his musicians, his acrobats. He even buried models of stables, granaries, and bathhouses complete with tiny ceramic toilets. Because what good is eternity without amenities? Tonight, as you lie in stillness, think of those silent ranks beneath the Chinese earth. Think of their eyes carved with care, their hands molded to hold vanished weapons, their feet aligned in perfect order, and above them the world spins on, unaware, or maybe just unwilling to disturb what lies below. Because some legacies aren't written in books. They're standing underground, waiting. You stand ankle deep in warm water, the surface like a mirror rippling under your breath. Around you, the sky blends seamlessly into the sea, and the island ahead glows gold under a lazy sun. It's quiet, eerily so, but the ground beneath your feet hums just faintly. You're not imagining it. You're standing on the edge of Santorini, ancient Thera, and below your feet is one of the most destructive volcanic craters in human history. But we're not talking about the explosion yet. We're talking about what came before a city called Akrotiri, buried in ash for thousands of years, preserved like a time capsule. And here's the twist. Akrotiri wasn't primitive. It wasn't waiting for civilization to arrive. It was civilization. Before Pompeii, before Rome even reached its stride, there was this Aegean jewel, a Minoan city full of multi-story houses, indoor plumbing, vibrant frescoes, paved streets, and rooftop gardens. It thrived around 1600 BCE, just as the Bronze Age was humming along. And then one day, it disappeared, buried, not destroyed, by a massive volcanic eruption that preserved it in ash so perfectly that archaeologists found furniture still in place, walls still painted, and toilets, yes, functional toilets with working drainage systems. Let's pause on that. Akrotiri had a 2-story sewer system in some buildings, with flushing toilets. In the Bronze Age, that means someone here looked at the mess of human life and said, we should really pipe this outside. You didn't see that in most of Europe until the 1800s. And that wasn't even the flashiest part. Akrotiri was gorgeous. Frescoes covered entire walls, dolphins leaping through waves, lilies bending in the wind, women in flowing robes with bold curls and knowing smiles. These weren't just decorations. They were stories painted in pigment and pride. There were no armies depicted, no scenes of conquest or kings parading with captives. Just life, nature, celebration. We still don't know what they called themselves. Their writing linear A hasn't been deciphered, but their art speaks volumes. It says we were here. We were thoughtful. We had taste and technology. Their buildings had windows for ventilation, rainwater collection systems, and interior staircases. Some walls were reinforced for seismic stability. That's right, earthquake-resistant architecture. In the Bronze Age, and yet despite all this brilliance, we almost missed it entirely. For centuries, the ruins of Akrotiri lay silent beneath the pumice and ash of the Thera eruption, one of the largest volcanic explosions in human history. Some say it was 4 times more powerful than Krakatoa. It didn't just wipe out the city, it might have altered global climate for years. Some scholars think it caused plummeting temperatures as far away as China. Others argue it weakened the Minoan economy enough to pave the way for Mycenaean dominance. And then there's the Atlantis theory. Oh yes, Akrotiri has long been one of the leading candidates for the origin of Plato's lost city, an advanced civilization destroyed by catastrophe swallowed by the sea. It's not a perfect match, but the details are tempting. An island society, remarkable engineering, sudden disappearance, and echoes that stretched across the Mediterranean. Historians still debate it, of course. Some say Atlantis was never real. Others think it was a myth woven from many threads, Akrotiri among them. But even without the legend, Akrotiri is a revelation because it shows us what was possible, that civilizations we often dismiss as ancient or early were in many ways ahead of us in comfort design and harmony with nature. Akrotiri had no defensive walls. No weapons were found. No signs of violent conquest. It may have been a peaceful city, focused on trade art and stability. And here's the odd moving fact: no human remains were found. Not one body. It seems the people of Akrotiri had time to escape. There were warning tremors, maybe small eruptions days or even weeks before the big one. They evacuated, taking valuables with them. And so what we have now is a city paused, like someone turned off the lights and walked out the door and never came back, which is somehow more haunting than destruction. A place abandoned at its peak, untouched, perfect, waiting. Archaeologists have only uncovered a portion of the city. Excavations are still ongoing. Each new fresco, each broken pot, each room tells another story. But what's already emerged is enough to reshape how we think of the Bronze Age. Because it wasn't dark, it was luminous. So tonight, as you lie still and feel the rumble of your own heartbeat, picture Akrotiri's walls, painted with saffron gatherers and blue monkeys, with parades of spring and processions of dancers. Imagine a courtyard where someone once set out a bowl of figs expecting to return. A rooftop garden where laughter echoed under a sunset sky, and then quiet. Ash fell like snow. The air thickened, and the world went still. But underneath it all, a story remained. And now you know it. You brush your fingers across the stone, and it's covered in writing, but not any writing you recognize. The letters are vertical, linear, precise. They look like trees, or ladders, or the delicate stems of plants in a windless garden. You're staring at Linear B, the earliest known form of written Greek. And it's not carved into a temple or monument. It's scribbled on a clay tablet about goat rations. Welcome to the Mycenaean bureaucracy, ancient Greece's first paper pushers. Long before Homer sang of heroes and gods, before Plato imagined perfect forms, and Aristotle cataloged beetles, there were scribes hunched over damp clay, tallying livestock and calculating grain. And they were very, very good at it. The Mycenaeans, who dominated the Greek mainland from about 1600 to 1100 BCE, weren't just warriors with shiny bronze helmets. They were administrators running a tight operation from hilltop palaces like Mycenae Pylos and Thebes. And their scribes, they weren't writing poetry. They were writing records. Thousands of them. Linear B wasn't an alphabet. It was a syllabary, each sign representing a syllable. And it wasn't easy to read. Even for the scribes, it was work. This was a writing system designed for efficiency, not elegance. A way to track who owed what, how much grain went where, and how many oxen were still breathing this week. And while most of those tablets are now crumbly and beige, the content is surprisingly mundane. You'll find tablets that say things like, "To the bronze smith, deliver 1 unit of tin. 1 girl from Kyparissos assigned to the temple. 8 pigs, dead, cause bore." Okay, maybe that last one's exciting. But here's what makes these scribbles extraordinary. They were never meant to last. The tablets were simply air-dried and stored in archives. If the palace didn't burn down, they'd be destroyed or reused the next season. But when a fire did hit, whether from war accident or cosmic bad luck, the heat fired the clay, turned it into ceramic, preserved it for 3,000 years. So ironically, we only know what we do about the Mycenaean economy because it caught fire. And what a system it was. Each palace acted as the heart of its region, an administrative hub where officials managed taxes paid in goods labor, often conscripted, and production textiles, metal, livestock, wine. Farmers brought grainsmiths, crafted tools, and everything was logged with care. There were even quality control officers, inspectors whose job was to ensure cloth met specifications and that cattle were not in fact imaginary. It was like ancient Excel with better handwriting. And if you're imagining some crusty old scribes mumbling into their styluses, think again. These were elite professionals. Scribehood was a career path. Some even used personal flourishes, little marks on their tablets like tiny logos. One scholar nicknamed them brand tags, a Mycenaean version of sent from my iPad. But here's where the story bends. This entire civilization, organized, literate, powerful, vanished. Around 1200 BCE, the Mycenaean world collapsed. Palaces were abandoned. Writing disappeared. Linear B fell silent, not to be rediscovered until the 20th century. For centuries, Greece had no writing at all. A literal dark age. And when writing returned, it was different. The Greeks adopted the Phoenician alphabet, leading eventually to the scripts we know today. Linear B remained buried in the past until a self-taught genius named Michael Ventris in the 1950s cracked the code. He proved that the language behind the script wasn't mysterious or foreign. It was early Greek, which means those goat rations, that lost temple girl, they weren't just numbers. They were the first Greek sentences ever written. And what a weird twist that is. The first words of Greek weren't poetry, or philosophy, or drama. They were receipts, because civilization isn't built on dreams alone. It's built on paperwork, and the more you look at these records, the more human they feel. You can see officials struggling to track resources across villages, workers demanding more wool, priests managing surplus grain. Even hints of corruption. Some tablets list goods that don't quite add up or mysteriously vanish from the books. No heroes, no gods, just people trying to keep the lights on. And yet through that mundanity, something beautiful emerges, a picture of life. You can trace trade routes by where the tin came from. See gender roles and how women were assigned to religious roles, while men got armor-making duties. You can watch the year pass by in the movement of cattle, the storage of wine, the prep for festival season. It's the everyday, frozen, which is perhaps the best argument for writing things down. Tonight, as your mind drifts and your thoughts get fuzzy, imagine a quiet room in ancient Pylos. A young scribe dipping his stylus into wet clay, making quick marks, tapping a corner to smooth it, setting it aside to dry. Just another workday, just another list, and then fire and silence. And 3,000 years later, you hold that tablet in your hands. And for a moment, you see what he saw. A goat, a girl, a number that doesn't quite match, and history scribbled into being. You press your hand to the wall, and it's damp, cool and smooth, with the scent of minerals and time. Light flickers across the chamber, dancing along animal forms that leap, twist, and fade into darkness. You're not in a museum. You're in a cave in southern France, in a place called Chauvet, and around you is one of the oldest art galleries on Earth. 36,000 years ago, someone stood where you're standing now, and they painted. By the flicker of flame, they traced the arc of a horse's neck, the ripple of a bison's flank, the snarl of a lion mid-pounce. They weren't doodling. They weren't decorating. They were telling a story in charcoal ochre and breath, and it's still here. The walls of the Chauvet cave hold over 400 animal images: rhinos, bears, ibexes, lions, panthers, hyenas, mammoths. Not just stick figures, but dynamic forms full of movement. The artists used shading perspective, even animation, repeating outlines of legs and heads to simulate motion in torchlight. Yes, prehistoric motion blur. These weren't cave people grunting in animal skins. These were creators. With tools, pigments, rituals. Some mixed spit with ochre to make the paint stick. Others used hollow bones to airbrush the pigment. They knew the curves of the walls could make a lion's body swell in shadow, that a flickering flame could make a horse gallop. They weren't copying what they saw. They were reimagining it, which raises the haunting question: why? Was it religion? Did they believe these animals had spirits that could be summoned or honored? Were these walls sacred? Storybooks? Hunting manuals? Theories abound. Some say the caves were early temples, spaces for shamans to travel between worlds. Others argue it was about memory, that painting the world helped them keep the world. Historians still debate, but whatever the reason, this much is clear: it was important. The artists walked miles underground, sometimes crawling, to reach the deepest galleries. They brought torches, pigment scaffolding. They didn't live here. There's no hearth, no garbage, no bedding. These caves weren't homes. They were sanctuaries, and the work was shared. Some handprints, spit paint silhouettes, and red palm streaks belonged to children, some to women, some to left-handed artists. We know because the finger lengths match. One boy, nicknamed the Sorcerer, left his palm in nearly a dozen places. He couldn't have been more than 9. But he walked into the dark and left a mark that outlived every monument we've ever built. And it wasn't just Chauvet. There are caves all over Europe. Lascaux, Altamira, Cosquer, filled with similar images. Different styles, different animals, but the same underlying truth: we wanted to be remembered. We wanted to communicate, not just with each other, but with time. Which makes you wonder, what was the last thing you drew with a pen? A grocery list? A meeting doodle? These people drew eternity, and they did it while wolves howled outside, while the ice crept closer, while survival was a daily gamble, and fire was the only technology you could carry in your hands. They didn't have history, or kings, or gods with names, but they had vision, and they had each other. Some walls show layered artwork, earlier generations covered by newer ones. Not defaced, but built upon, like a communal mural painted across millennia. Others show footprints, soft impressions in clay floors. A child's foot beside a wolf's. Not a hunt, not an attack, just parallel paths. No one knows what happened next. And that's the point. Cave art doesn't explain. It doesn't label. It just exists. It invites you to wonder, not conclude. And here's the strange fact. For over 30,000 years, nobody walked into these caves and scribbled "I was here" over a bison's flank. No graffiti, no defacement. Until modern times, the art was untouched, respected, preserved by reverence or fear, or maybe something deeper. Recognition, because to look at those walls is to feel seen. Someone else stood in the dark with questions and fears and a burning need to create. Someone else said, "This matters. This is what I saw." Don't forget. It humbles you, it silences you, and then it fills you with light. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the room softens around the edges, picture a flickering torch held aloft by a human hand. The flame dances. Shadows ripple across a lion's mane. You hear breath, quiet, slow, focused. You see a smear of ochre on the wall. a palm print, and you know without doubt that someone was here. Long before the pyramids, long before the wheel, long before memory, and they were already telling stories. You're standing at the edge of a cliff, your breath catching in your throat, not from fear, but from the view. Ahead of you, stone buildings cling to the mesa, woven into the canyon walls like they grew there. Sunlight bounces off sandstone, turning everything gold. And behind you, the air is thick with silence, the kind that feels sacred. You've arrived at Mesa Verde, home of the ancestral Puebloans. And you're not the first to marvel at this place, but you might be the first to whisper, how did they get here? Because these weren't just caves. They were cities, nestled into high-altitude alcoves across the Four Corners region of the American Southwest. The cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde rise in tiers, multi-story towers, ceremonial rooms called kivas, and stone walls shaped with geometric precision. It looks like ancient scaffolding frozen in time. But this was a functioning community built between the 12th and 13th centuries CE. At its height, it may have housed more than 600 interconnected structures, all stacked inside the shelter of the rock. And they didn't use mortar. They shaped each sandstone block by hand, fitting them so tightly that even centuries of wind and rain haven't pried them loose. Roofs were made with wooden beams, packed with earth, sealed with clay. The result? Cozy, sturdy homes that stayed cool in the summer, warm in the winter, and protected from rain and snow. Practical, ingenious, and almost invisible from above by design. Because Mesa Verde wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Historians still debate the reasons for building into the cliffs. Protection from enemies, shelter from weather, symbolic connection to the earth. Probably a little of everything. But what's clear is this: it wasn't built in haste. These weren't people hiding. They were people planning, and they planned well. Each cliff dwelling was part of a larger system, connected by footpaths, staircases carved into rock, and tiny hand and toe holds etched into vertical canyon walls. You had to be fit and fearless. But once you reached a dwelling, you were part of a community that thrived on cooperation and resilience. Because life here wasn't easy. Farming was done on the mesa tops, where soil was thin and rainfall uncertain. Crops like corn squash and beans had to be carefully managed. Water was collected in seeps, and springs carried in pottery jars up steep trails. Food was ground on metates, flat grinding stones that wore deep troughs from centuries of daily labor. And the people were tough. Their bones show signs of arthritis, muscle attachment from heavy labor, and worn teeth from chewing gritty maize. Children carried water. Elders tended fires. Everyone contributed. And still, there was art. Petroglyphs carved into canyon walls. Painted pots with black on white patterns so fine they look machine-made. Prayer sticks, feathered bundles, and effigy figures tucked into niches. These weren't just survivalists. They were storytellers, and their stories lived in the kivas. Circular and semi-subterranean, these sacred spaces were the spiritual heart of the community. You'd enter through a hole in the roof, descending a wooden ladder into cool darkness. Inside, a fire pit, a vent, and a small hole in the floor called a sipapu, symbolizing the portal through which the ancestors emerged from the underworld. Rituals took place here, ceremonies, maybe councils, maybe stories passed on long after sunset. The kiva was where the sacred and the ordinary blurred, and it was never alone. Most dwellings had multiple kivas. Some were private, others communal. The deeper you go, the more you feel it. This wasn't just about shelter. It was about meaning. And then one day, they left. Not suddenly. Not in disaster. There's no evidence of war or disease. No mass graves. Just a slow exodus in the late 13th century. Homes were emptied. Fire pits abandoned. The ladders gone. And Mesa Verde fell silent. Why? Theories abound. Climate change, a decades-long drought, soil depletion, resource scarcity. Some believe social tensions grew. Others point to the migration patterns of other Pueblo groups who moved south and east. What's certain is that the departure was intentional, respectful. Doorways were closed, kivas burned out, offerings left behind. They didn't vanish, they moved, and their descendants still live among the Hopi, the Zuni, and the Pueblo peoples of New Mexico who carry the oral histories of these ancient builders. To them, Mesa Verde isn't a ruin. It's a memory, a chapter, a place of emergence and return. And if you listen closely, that story still echoes. Tonight, as you lie back and feel the gravity of time settle over you, picture yourself descending into a kiva, the air cool, the walls round, the fire low. You hear voices above, grinding corn, laughing, whispering prayers. The stars outside are sharp, clear, countless. But in here, there's only the soft hiss of flame and the steady beat of belonging. You are underground, but you are not alone. You are in a place built with hands, with hope, and with stone. And it still stands. You hear it before you see it. A low hum, rhythmic and deliberate, like something ancient still breathing. Then the jungle opens. The trees fall back, and rising before you is a mountain of stone, steps symmetrical, crowned by sky. You're staring at El Castillo, the great pyramid of Chichen Itza, and it doesn't blink, but it listens, because this isn't just a building. It's an instrument, built by the Maya sometime around the 9th century CE. El Castillo, also known as the Temple of Kukulkan, is more than a monument to power or religion. It's a masterclass in acoustic engineering. If you clap your hands at the base of the staircase, the echo that bounces back sounds not like your clap, but like the chirp of a sacred bird, the resplendent quetzal. Coincidence? Not a chance. The Maya weren't guessing. They understood sound. The steps of the pyramid were deliberately spaced to shape the echo. Archaeologists and sound engineers have tested it. The result is uncanny, a clear descending chirp that mimics the call of the quetzal, a bird deeply connected to the god Kukulkan. The pyramid wasn't just built for looks, it was alive. And so was the entire city. Chichen Itza, nestled in the Yucatan Peninsula of modern-day Mexico, was one of the most important Maya city-states of the late Classic and early post-Classic periods. At its peak, it was a hub of commerce, astronomy, politics, and religion, a city where math met myth, where temples aligned with stars and where stone whispered back. And it all began with obsession, with time. The Maya weren't just timekeepers. They were time sculptors. They tracked solar and lunar cycles, the movement of Venus, the exact days of equinox and solstice. Their calendar system was absurdly precise, so precise in fact that it rivaled those of modern astronomers and far surpassed any calendar system in Europe for centuries. And El Castillo, it's a calendar in stone. Each of the 4 staircases has 91 steps. Add the platform on top, and you get 365, one for each day of the year. During the spring and fall equinoxes, the setting sun casts a serpent-shaped shadow that appears to slither down the side of the pyramid. At that moment, light and structure merge, and Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, descends. Not metaphorically, visibly. That kind of alignment isn't decorative. It's intentional cosmology, an architecture that honors the heavens, invites the divine, and reminds every viewer that the universe notices you. And that was just the beginning. Elsewhere, in Chichen Itza, stands the Great Ball Court, the largest of its kind in Mesoamerica. Over 500 feet long with walls towering high above it was a stage for the ritual ball game Paktapak, a blend of sport ceremony and maybe even execution. Players struck a heavy rubber ball with their hips, trying to send it through a vertical stone ring high on the wall. No hands, no feet, just rhythm power and impossible aim. But here's the eerie part the court talks. The acoustics are so sharp that a whisper at one end can be heard clearly at the other. Clap, and the sound rebounds in 9 perfect echoes, a number sacred to the Maya. The space is more than a court. It's a resonating chamber, a stage for gods and mortals alike. And the stakes, possibly life and death. Some scholars argue that the losing team, or perhaps the winning captain, was sacrificed. Others suggest the game was purely ceremonial, meant to reenact cosmic battles between dark and light gods and underworld. The truth may be somewhere in between. But one thing is clear, the game mattered. It was myth in motion, and the city reflected that belief in every detail. There were cenotes, natural sinkholes filled with water that served as sacred wells and gateways to the underworld. One, called the Cenote Sagrado, was used for ritual offerings. Archaeologists have recovered gold jade pottery, human remains, all given to the gods below. Because for the Maya, the earth wasn't solid. It was layered. This world, the heavens, the underworld, all connected by axes, trees, caves, pyramids. Every sacred space was a door. Even the city layout was celestial. Buildings were oriented to align with solstices, equinoxes, Venus cycles. The observatory, a circular structure called El Caracol, features windows precisely positioned to track the planet Venus. That's how deep their obsession went. Not just sunrises, Venus. And still, it was a city of people. Farmers, merchants, artisans. The smell of maize and chocolate. The clatter of stone tools. The grinding of corn into masa. The beat of drums in a plaza. Life moved in rhythms just like the heavens. And when it didn't, when drought or political strife came, the city changed. Eventually, Chichen Itza was abandoned. Not in a single day. Not from a single cause. Over time, the people moved. Climate shifted. New centers of power rose. But the stones stayed, waiting, remembering. And now, centuries later, tourists climb the steps, clap their hands, and listen for the echo of a bird that once meant more than a call. It meant connection. So tonight, as you drift into quiet, imagine standing beneath the stars at Chichen Itza. The air is thick with warmth and memory. A serpent slithers down the steps in shadow. The stone rings echo with ancient games. The night hums with mathematics, mythology, and music. And above it all, the stars shine exactly where the Maya knew they would. Not fate, just math. And faith, you can hear it before you see it. A steady, rhythmic pounding. Like drums echoing down the corridor of time. Then the jungle parts, and there it is, a city not built from stone blocks, but raised from the earth itself, floating like a mirage above a lake. You've arrived at Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, and everything about it defies expectation. This was a city built on water. Right in the middle of Lake Texcoco, modern-day Mexico City, Tenochtitlan rose like a lotus. When the Mexica people first arrived in the valley around 1325 CE, they found a swamp, uninhabitable, unloved. But they also saw a sign: an eagle perched on a cactus holding a snake. That vision, foretold by prophecy, told them where to build their new home. They didn't hesitate. They drove wooden stakes deep into the marsh, piled mud and stone, and began building islands. Not little huts either, a metropolis. By the early 1500s, just before the arrival of the Spanish Tenochtitlan, had a population of more than 200,000 people, larger than London or Paris at the time. And it wasn't chaotic, it was a city of order. Wide causeways connected the island to the mainland. Each one had drawbridges that could be raised for defense. Canals crisscrossed the city, making it Venice-like in its layout. Canoes glided through these watery avenues, carrying people, goods, and gossip. Bridges and stepping stones allowed foot traffic to pass safely, unless the rains came, in which case everyone just paddled. But the real magic was in the floating farms, the chinampas. These were artificial islands used for agriculture, created by weaving reeds into rafts, piling on layers of lakebed mud, and anchoring them with willow trees. Over time, the roots reached down into the lake and held the whole thing in place. The result: fertile plots that floated like gardens on the water's surface, producing corn squash beans, amaranth, flowers, even medicinal herbs. Tenochtitlan didn't just feed itself. It fed an empire, and it did it beautifully. The city was divided into neighborhoods, each with its own markets, schools, temples, and public buildings. Houses were made of stone or adobe, whitewashed and clean. Streets were swept. Public baths were common. Aztec nobles used fragrant herbs and even toothbrushes made from agave fibers. That's right, dental hygiene in the 15th century. There were botanical gardens, zoological collections, and libraries of codices, painted books full of knowledge passed down through generations. The priests were mathematicians, astronomers, historians. Their calendars were as precise as the Mayas, their ceremonies as elaborate as anything in Rome. And then there was the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple, a towering double pyramid at the heart of the city, dedicated to two gods, Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. One side bathed in sunlight, the other in rainwater, a duality reflecting the Aztec belief in balance creation and destruction war and nourishment, fire and water. Climb to the top, and you'd overlook a city of whitewashed walls, blue canals, green chinampas, and golden sun. And far beyond the mountains, snow-capped and watching. And yes, the rituals were intense. The Aztecs believed the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world. In return, the gods required blood life energy. Human sacrifice wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was seen as cosmic debt repayment, a way to keep the sun rising, the crops growing. And yet, despite the dramatic images history has painted, the vast majority of Aztec life was not ceremonial violence. It was education, trade, farming, artistry, and deeply layered philosophy. Aztec poets wrote of flowers as metaphors for impermanence. Warriors meditated on the meaning of death. Parents taught their children not just obedience, but beauty. One poet wrote, "Does one truly live on earth? Not forever on earth, only a little while here. Though it be jade, it will be broken. Though it be gold, it will be crushed." That doesn't sound like a warmonger. It sounds like someone thinking. And that's what Tenochtitlan really was, a mind-made manifest. A worldview laid out in stone, water, and ritual. A belief that life was fleeting, but could be honorable, beautiful, and balanced while it lasted. And then came Cortez, In 1519, the Spanish arrived. 2 years later, Tenochtitlan fell, not just from guns or steel, but from disease, deception, and disruption. Smallpox ravaged the population. Political alliances fractured. And when the final battle came, the city, once the most advanced in the Americas, was reduced to rubble. On its bones, Mexico City was built, but the soul of Tenochtitlan lingers. Archaeologists are still uncovering pieces of it. Foundations beneath cathedrals, offerings beneath plazas, bits of turquoise obsidian and bone, echoes in the canals, murmurs in the dust. And every now and then, a song from the past rises through the concrete. Tonight, as you rest in a world paved over by progress, remember the city on the lake. Its chinampas floating like dreams, its gods watching from Twin Peaks, its people sweeping their streets clean each morning, planting maize with calloused hands, and writing poetry under starlight. A city lost, but never truly gone.